Vice Mayor Filseth. Councilmember Koo. Here. Chair Scharf.
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka. 4 present.
He just stepped out for one brief moment. I'll grab him.
Chairman,
Good morning.
council members, committee members. Oh, the mic's on. Does that mean it's you called on me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Sorry I was out there still looking for some money at the last minute. I thought I would sort of walk through the brief PowerPoint that the staff has put together in advance of sort of any of your taking public comment and how we work through things. I think it would be good if we could hit the first slide, which should show roughly what the sort of wrap-up agenda is. So you guys did a lot of, actually, I don't know how you felt about it. I thought that the compressed day-long sort of sessions worked with it more efficiently. I can certainly say on the staff side of things, you know, I think we were clearly more productive in the fact that people could be on call but still be working and that sort of thing, rather than, you know, hanging around night after night and that sort of thing. But anyway, you work through the budget really pretty well, and you know, for the most part, identified just a few sort of outstanding issues at that point in time that you put in the parking lot. This issue about the library hours and where the library department was, you know, concern about some the non-funding of the urban forest master plan and public works, and, you know, certainly some interest in, you know, how to move towards electric vehicles, but even some larger questions just about our vehicle replacement fund. And we have staff here, Mike from Public Works and some staff, Monique is here from the library. We can speak to those items. That being said, you know, the big discussion point really is the directive that you gave us last Thursday to look for potential cost savings as far as a structural cost change adjustment in the budget, so that the city could begin to really contribute to what the committee sees as the true, the likely real unfunded pension liability that is hanging over the city, that, you know, obviously risks, you know, as Councilmember Tanaka has mentioned, talking about his dad or whatever, the potential that the pension isn't there in the future, and larger questions of those costs crowding out other spending and services in the city as the years unfold, and the need to really deal with that. And so we, the whole leadership team and staff, really worked all through the weekend and stuff, looking at ideas and issues and that sort of thing. And I have some recommendations that I do want to make to the committee. And then lastly, what you want to do by the end of your meeting is obviously formulate your final formal recommendation, motion to the council, transmitting the finance committee's recommended budget. So that's what the idea is. In addition, you also took a couple of tentative actions. One, you made some recommendations related to the auditor's budget, and you also made some recommendations relating to the Office of Sustainability. And, during this, I would speak to them. I generally would be including them in the recommendations and comments I would make about this directive on the $4 million in reduction, and I'll get clear about that. So, the first, we kind of looked at two things here over the past 6 days. One is, what are the range of kinds of almost sort of more strategic things we need to be looking at long-term as a city, or things that may take quite some time for us to work through that could actually provide cost savings to the city, so that, one, we could really adequately support, say, for example, this increased contribution to our unfunded pension liabilities, but actually also maybe allow us to redirect funding into other areas of the city that over time may really need those. And, I'm not in a position at all to bring you very specific examples for lots of different reasons. We'll go over that with you. But this is just an example of some of the things that we identified working through things. In the realm of public safety, regionalization, this would be looking at initial sorts of things like how could we regionalize our dispatch functions for police and fire and consolidate them in a way with Mountain View, potentially Los Altos, and those sorts of things. As we think about the public safety building, for example, which actually has a dispatch sort of EOC center there. There's ways to look at, do we proceed with it that way, or do we think more opportunistically that we would have a facility there that we think could very easily accommodate a regionalized dispatch operation? And so could we partner with Mountain View and that sort of thing to sort of share resources? Those are things that just take some time to work through. We've identified the need, right, for doing things like looking at ultimately reducing, some of our great public safety costs by looking at how could we civilianize the emergency medical response aspects of the staffing in the fire department. Well, those are big shifts and changes. Those would take time. They involve meet and confer, potential bargaining issues, and those sorts of things. Are there consolidations we could do? We've looked at in the past. Could we consolidate some of our fire departments in some ways to save money? Again, those are big questions and issues. All of them are worthwhile questions, and we need to be thinking about and looking at them, but we wouldn't be in a position to say, well, that could be transmitted into something that you could count as a cost savings that could be contributed right now. You ask us to look at issues, so one of the things is that we invest a lot in support of the school district, maybe $5 to $8 million annually, depending upon how you want to count that. Is that something that long-term the city should be continuing, or do we have a more robust cost-sharing discussion with the school district? Well, if we were to make changes there, that's something that takes time to work through those conversations. Cubberley, we have been we're actively trying to move ahead in master planning the Cubberley site, but we have been discussing Cubberley and planning for a long time. I don't want to be cynical about it, but right now, it's quite the possibility, if we don't really get going on what we're going to do with Cubberley, that we will make the general planning process look like it was very quick in comparison to our ability to plan what we're going to do at Cubberley. But the point here is this, is that is that the city, in one form or another, basically pays the school district close to $8 million a year for the lease of Cubberley. And we're still sitting with a building that, some of that money allows us to do some maintenance and some small-scale capital investment, but we're really not. We are not moving towards implementing a vision worthy of where our community is. And so I hate to say it, but when you ask for $8 million in cost savings, and we say, look, we're giving $8 million in lease payments, that's something that we should have a conversation about. That's not something that you would be saying, oh, let's go ahead and just make that change. That's something that would have to be talked about over time. There are a lot of different things, both in creating new public-private partnerships versus, we continue to disproportionately fund Project Safety Net. I mean, we helped convene that group, but it is a collaborative across the not-for-profit, the city and the school district that, again, the city is the prime funder on. And then lots of things in operational changes. There's always a question of how do we increase revenues. Recovering full costs of services through fees, great ideas, and we'll have Michelle talk about that a little bit later in some larger context. But that's again, takes varying degrees of a lot of work. So the whole point of it is we might have identified $15 million or so that we might be able to look at over time that could really be recaptured or redirected in some way, but we're not in a position to be able to say we could answer those things and we could put that in a way that you can make definitive recommendations on any of those things right now as far as recapturing those costs. That's a longer-term issue. That's strategic. So that's that group. Let's call that macro strategic issues. Go to the next slide. This is where we got more focused on saying, okay, well, if we really had to generate $5 million, what would that look like? And we issued reduction goals to different departments to give us some ideas of how to plan those things. And I just give you some examples of the kinds of things that we had to come up with. We are not ready for prime time to be able to say, yes, we recommend we would make these specific changes. There are lots of implications. For example, some of the things we looked at involve position reductions. Some of those could involve, if we were to proceed with those things, they could be positions that have people in them. Our practice really is not to make reductions with people in them. We find ways to, identify opportunities to, when we've been, even in the height of the Great Recession, when we eliminated all of those positions. Lalo, I can't remember. It seems to me we hardly even got to any situation where anybody actually was.
You were only a couple.
Only a couple people out of all of the reductions that we made. And that's because we had advanced time, we worked through the issues, that sort of thing. And the fact of the matter is, you've heard me say it increasingly of late, our workforce actually is the biggest asset that this city has. And there is no great Palo Alto quality of life through quality of services if we don't have a quality workforce. So we're not in a position to talk through those, but again, you see things like, community services, we gave them a target, they identified little things and big things, but, we cut out special events funding that we're doing, summer concerts, other things, and public safety. When we push fire on stuff, for the most part, they would have to look at, do we reduce fire station staffing? Is it possible to open, close a fire station at night? And only operate during the day? Well, again, even if we were to do those things, forgetting the community reaction, we would have meet and confer requirements that we would have to do. So it's not the sort of thing that I would say you could, I would recommend you would not be in a position to endorse those actions at this point in time. So that's the point. So the real point gets to this, which is, we really would need more time to analyze the full and secondary impacts and benefits of the changes that we would make. So to that extent, I would also say that my own recommendation would be that and we'll come back to this more clearly, but we come back to the council or to the committee in the course of the first quarter of this year with a much more detailed discussions about what the areas could be available, how we discuss those openly with you, but, with the chance to have, really done a lot more impact analysis in the conversations with our own leadership, staff, team members on what it would take to, actually carve out a $4 million structural reduction this year, and to be able to do it in a thoughtful enough way that we don't end up with, uncertainties and things that are unknown. And I would recommend that when it comes time to formulating your own recommendations, that the recommendation that you made about the auditor's office function would be handled in that same way, that would be a concern that you would ask us to look at during this kind of review of, what are the best ways to do cost saving. Same thing on the sustainability position, and I'd be able to talk to that one more specifically with you. So that's what the real point is saying, we think you can get there as to what you want to achieve, and I'll talk to that specifically about some possibilities for how you proceed at the end here. But I am telling you right now that we would not make the best decisions at the detailed level if we were to try to do that right now. We really need more time, and you can appreciate that. Look, you ask us in 6 days to do 2 or 3 times the amount of cuts that it took us 2 months during our budget process with the staff to work through. So that's what the thoughts are here. What we would like, though, then to do is to think about, if we could just sort of put this out for you all a little bit, how it is that we could structure ultimately the conversations with the Finance Committee. Maybe we get to have a chance to do some of that here this morning, about some ways of looking at what we're trying to achieve and how we actually might really begin to prioritize, the areas that we want to focus on, so that it doesn't, I don't think we want to have ad hoc decisions. I think we want you to be able to endorse the most cost-effective, but the ones that still provide the highest value to our community, and that we're able to tell you how effectively we can assimilate the change in the organization and the impacts it would have. And what that means is, I think we can meet your request of what to do about this $4 or $5 million, except that we're going to need to spend more time at the start of the fiscal year with the staff and with finance to do that. We can't do it in this time frame. So with that, I would like to ask Michelle maybe are you ready to do this? To sort of, when we were working through this, I try to think about, how we provide maximum value. We're not just after trying to cut budgets. We're really trying to say, because the good you're trying to do is to say, look, we're not giving you this cut because we just want you to cut $4 million. We're saying we need to make room for making contributions, and that $4 million is only half of a known identified contribution that you think we really need to be making on our pension side of things. We're going to have growing needs and issues as a city in the future. And is there some way that you as the elected officials working with us can have some frameworks that we might begin to start using to think about the trade-offs that are always involved when we want to make some of these changes? So, Mr. Chairman, with the indulgence for a few minutes for Michelle to kind of go over this, give you some food for thought at least, and some suggestions we have, and then we get to the end, I would just sort of talk more specifically about how we move forward from this.
Sure, you bet. One of the things that Jim has been talking about is in the process of trying to address the unfunded pension liability challenges, we need to be looking at putting the organization on a path forward in the long term, because it's really a 30-year problem we're dealing with, not a 1-year problem. And so what does that mean for us in terms of managing the organization and serving the community? And as we talked about that, we really talked about how it comes down to grappling with balancing what can sometimes feel like competing priorities of fiscal responsibility, operational needs, and community priorities. And one of the ways to think about those three buckets is to think about the city's core mission and fulfilling the city's core mission and getting clear about defining what is the city's core mission. What are we mandated to provide? What are the key municipal services that are a city's responsibility? And as we, over time, take a look at broader interpretations of that in order to meet other objectives, like community values, we end up in some trade-offs. So if you look at the second circle of values, we have community values and also organizational values that can help refine or expand our definition of our mission. And in the third bullet or circle, we've got core cost effectiveness, which is where we're talking about sort of return on investment or how much bang for the buck are we getting, as well as how efficiently are we running the organization, how cost effective are we, how are we doing in terms of our fiscal responsibility. And again, these become trade-offs for the council and for city management as we grapple with highly treasured values in our community and the added cost those represent and the potential changes to city mission that those can represent. So if you could move on. So as we look at those competing values, one way to think about this is to not think about them as competing, but to think about them as complementary. And when we're trying to prioritize really difficult choices during times of budget constraint, trying to figure out which things we're investing in that meet all three of these as opposed to just one or two of them. So that instead of thinking about trade-offs, thinking about maximizing the value of our investments. And so thinking about how do we, first and foremost, as responsible community stewards who are interested in building and keeping stable the Palo Alto community that we cherish, looking at what is important there that aligns with our core mission and that we can deliver in a cost-effective way, and that those should be our highest priorities. So when we find things that are highly appealing, but are highly appealing in perhaps only one of these areas, to think long and hard about what the implications are there in comparison to the other things that we're trying to do. So, for example, Jim spoke a few moments ago about cost sharing, and looking at cost sharing with some of our community partners is a way to drill a little bit deeper on the notion of core mission and which aspects of what we are putting our money toward are truly the city's business versus business that may be something that another community partner might be picking up, whether it's county government, whether it's the school district, or whether it's a nonprofit organization, for example. Cost effectiveness becomes pretty tricky because when we're doing cost cutting in a budget, one of the things that can look very simple in cost cutting is things that look like overhead. But if we want to deliver our services most effectively, we need resources to do that. If we want to be able to see whether or not we have efficient results and we're getting the most bang for our buck, then we need analysts who can study the metrics. So we have to pay for people who sit at desks in addition to people who actually deliver the services. We have to pay for the IT systems that make that analysis possible. So things like IT systems and support staff make efficient results a part of the service delivery. And we want to do all of that in the context of prioritizing the policies that the council has articulated as most important. Those guide everything else. So we wanted to introduce this framework to you not as an answer to all challenges, but as a language that we can continue to go back to and reference as we move forward and start talking about the different kinds of competing priorities we're juggling with, and how focusing in one area of this may at times create compromises in other areas that are unintended, and being able to look at all three of the parts of this Venn diagram strategically when we're grappling with budget decisions going forward.
And, we're not advocating this, we're suggesting that this is a simple and useful framework for also getting clearer about where people are coming from at times, whether it's a committee or our organization or the community, because one of the real issues we have is our, we have good ideas and then we start to deploy them and then people perceive them from different frameworks or perspectives, right? So, we often will hear, well, wait, that's not the most cost effective, let's go ahead and do this, and we ultimately realize, yeah, well, there's a value in our community, though, that relates to that. I mean, just pick one just most simply. I mean, the Palo Alto process, is that efficient? Really? I mean, I guarantee you that almost any benchmarking city that we send here to sort of say, how could you be more efficient, would say, boy, I think you need to reform a lot of your processes. I mean, how much did the comp plan cost us over a decade's worth of work? I mean, in just actual costs, staff time, consultant time, all of those sorts of things. We pay premiums because there are values we might have about engagement and listening in the community that have prices. And if we just focus on price, then we turn around and we ignore the value that's maybe undone. Core mission. I mean, we provide most likely way more in direct funding as a city to our school district than by far would be the norm. You say, well, if a core mission would really say, what is it that only we can do? That's what we would provide as the most essential things. It can't be done by somebody else in some ways. And yet, on the other hand, we would say, a counterpunch would be, we say, you know what, the quality of the K through 12 education is so crucial to the quality of life in this community as a value that we're willing to say we're going to step outside of our core mission and do those things. We can talk about all sorts of efficiencies and stuff, and I'll tell you, we pick up dead animals off the street. If we don't get a dead squirrel off the street in 20 minutes in our town, we got people calling us up. Most other cities let those things just desiccate naturally, and they're just there. So I'm just using this as kind of almost humorous examples, but there is a cost. So if you want to start to know how do we evaluate things, and we'll ultimately say, yeah, good, well, I'll tell you how much it costs to get a squirrel off the street. I can guarantee you it's over $100 by far. It probably costs $500. When we were looking at the tree trimming stuff and the tree trimming cycle, we have this really strong value about the urban forest, and the canopy is just our lifestyle, and we have this discussion about the tree trimming cycle itself. Beyond that regular contract, though, we have tree trimmers, or at least one or some, who are on call to basically respond to an individual call from a citizen to say, we have a problem with the tree, and we're pretty good about getting out there. Many other cities do not provide those levels of services that we do. So we provide a very high quality of service. Why? Because we value responsiveness to the public. We value the fact that we, in a sense, have high standards and high expectations and qualities of the community. And we more often than not separate those things. We talk about that over here on one hand, and then on the other hand we get into like real cost cutting about how do we save some money, and we don't link those things together. So what we're saying is, to make the best choices and the right choices, we need to be sure that we do, in a public sense, we're able to account for what we do. And particularly because I think the committee is asking us two things. You are asking us to make room for us being able to make this necessary investment in our long-term pension obligations in a meaningful way. And you also want us ultimately say, in that case and in anything else, we don't want, we want to be conscious, we don't want things crowding out things that are even more essential because we're not paying attention to them, we're not analyzing them, we're not dealing with them directly. And so even once we, and if we do the 4 million, you're very clear, that's only half of what we have identified as this known issue. So we've got to, in a next year, be able to systematically come back, and there will be other things. So how is it that we how is it that we really consciously look at big issues and big changes, right? There are lots of things we could do more effectively that will require just changes in behavior. We have to accept the use of more technology and things. We don't even use license plate readers in a meaningful way that are done in lots of other cities that could make a big difference in how we go out and do just permit parking enforcement. So on the one hand, we say, yeah, we need to provide one of the highest levels of service on regulating parking in neighborhoods. And yet, and we also want to be concerned about costs, and yet we don't maximize our use of systems or technology that allow us to do that because we have whatever other concerns, privacy, whatever they are. So, and all of those things, because they're all on the table, but not so overtly or specifically in Palo Alto, means we have to work through a lot of process. So we're trying to get to some way, we're acknowledging that we need some more process just in the near term with the Finance Committee for us to advance your cuts and your adjustments. So if we turn to the last page, I think we can do that. What we're asking the committee is that we need more time to fully analyze and articulate the benefits and impacts of possible reductions. Secondly, the directive that the committee gave us at the close of your session was directed towards the general fund, but we need to acknowledge that the pension obligation issue we have is not just in the general fund. I mean, we have employees, a third of our employees are outside the general fund in the enterprise funds. We need to do the same thing in that arena. Now, in some ways, that's easier within the enterprise funds because we actually have more flexibility about how we adjust revenues. But again, those issues potentially have some impact on our rates and those things, so we have some discussions to do there. But we clearly recommend that we're not solving this problem if we don't expand this to all funds. Again, we talked about having a clearer decision criteria and framework for addressing concerns and direction. I think that's important for three reasons at least, right? One is that so that we make the best possible decisions, obviously. Secondly, that it's clear to the community why we're making a particular choice, since there may be competing perspectives. And third, and extremely important, and I need to be the advocate on behalf of our organization for this, it's extremely important that our organization understand the criteria for the recommendations and the decisions that we're making. And that means we have to have some time to engage and talk with our workforce, not only on, I don't understand why we need to do this, or please just let me understand what it really means, to the second stage of that, which is it actually is way more complicated implementing changes that we want to make that are significant. And I'll just tell you this all the time. I have lots of great ideas. And I'll sit with the staff and I'll say, God, why don't we do that? That would be really good. We could save a bunch of this and we do that. And why don't you do? And I'm thinking, well, just go off and do it. And they come back and say, oh my God, you upset the apple cart. Do you realize there's all these different things that have to take place? And we're doing other stuff. So if you want us to do all this stuff, it has an impact on doing all of that. So the change issue, what it takes to change direction or implement things, has an impact. And we are not managing our resources, our human resources, or even our economic resources, or our expectations budget with you and the community, if we sort of say, yeah, we can go ahead and do something, and we can't articulate what the implementation cost is. So we need some time for that. And then there are, unfortunately, always other challenges there. So there's other obstacles that are out there. We have other things that we've already identified that are beyond the proposed FY19 budget that are going to be hitting us, right? We're going to have new labor contracts. Those are not built into the budget. There may be other projects or programs that we're going to still have to continue to look at. If we're having increasing problems as we do in recruiting and retaining employees, we may need to make certain investments, whether it's around how we get people to work or where and how they work. those may require new approaches and new costs. So in parallel with, as we're figuring out how to reallocate our budget to be able to provide this important strategic funding for pension and ultimately other things, we've got to find ways to how we're going to accommodate some of those things in FY19. So all of that lines up to say that you know, I think we need to figure out how we put together some sort of a work approach and work plan with the Finance Committee as to how we would move forward on this. And that would, again, include responding to your directive on identifying $4 to $5 million in budget cuts or changes, and it would also apply to your suggestions about cutting the auditor's budget at this point, put that in that same framework of how do we look at how to best serve and provide the audit function over the course of, again, this first quarter of the new fiscal year, working at the staff level and with finance. And it will also give us some chance to have some more public discussions with finance about what the future of sustainability, all of those things will be as we we're going to reduce the staffing in the sustainability function and essentially just explicitly subsume that within the operations of the city manager's office. That being said, I think that you should be thinking about, are there ways to hold us accountable to the suggestions that we're making here? And I would turn that over to you all, but is there things that I need to add? Ed, Kylie, Lalo, corrections, any misstatements I made?
I think you got it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman?
So we have some public speakers, so I could go to the public, or we could have a brief, why don't we just have a brief reaction to what the city manager said, or if anyone wants to say anything.
I was just wondering, I didn't notice on the agenda any agenda item additions or deletions or changes. Is that, can I say it now, or is this,
I think it would
How
be
does it work
premature
on
for you to
this?
make motions, but
Yeah.
not
I-
motions, I'm not
or
making,
sug- But clearly, this session is agendized to be able to
have
adopt
exchange?
the budget, yeah.
Right, so I think what we're gonna do is we'll start with the reaction of the city manager, then I'll go to the public, and then we have to deal with the parking lot items, and then we'll just do a wrap-up about anything else we've done or talked about, that kind of stuff.
In that case, then I just want to say that, you know, I appreciate all the work that you guys did in that last week with the new direction and instructions from council. I can't imagine the amount of work that you guys were doing, so thank you so much. At the same time, the last time when we met, we made some decisions that I had time to think about and get to know a little bit more about, and I actually want to reverse my votes, in particular to the auditor's office. So I would hope that we can bring the auditor back today in order for her to discuss what we had asked her to, what we had instructed. But also, so that is one that is very big, coming to understand from the community. And after that decision went out, the community really reached out, and I think we were all in the newspapers as well. But the auditor's office was a community directive. It was something that the community brought forward. So to eliminate it and to cut it off without any discussions with the auditor herself, I think that was not wise at all. So I'm reversing my vote on that. And hopefully we can ask her to come back to have a moment to kind of give us more information and discussion pertaining to her office. Then also, I'm also reversing my vote on the CIP projects, the projects that had come forth. especially with the infrastructure. We have limited funding on that, and we're going to be going out to the community, asking the community put votes on measures. I think right now it's just the TOT that is really the big one out there. And I don't think we have enough discussion on that. And then for Monday night to just pass the Charleston Ross to Darrell CIP just seemed to be moving one project above all the rest when we haven't even placed prioritization or made formal discussions or public discussions in terms of what we need to do to prioritize what is needed within the community. So I just want to put that on record that I'm changing my votes on those two items.
Mr. Chairman, just one thing real quickly. I think the comment about the auditor, I had suggested that we look at, this was just my suggestion, that we look at the recommendation, the intent of the recommendation from the committee earlier on the auditor, really to fold that into this deeper review of issues in the first quarter. So when essentially be requesting that you do sort of rescind that directive there. But I don't want to be presumptuous. I'm one CAO. I can't speak for the auditor, and was certainly expecting that the auditor would have the opportunity to talk to the council also. So I don't want to be. I want to be very cognizant of the boundaries there. So thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Filseth.
Yeah, so thank you very much for all the work you guys have done. And I think if I understand that the discussion here, it's then, given that we're talking about really structural issues that need to be done somewhat carefully and will take time, that what we propose is basically a high-intensity process with Finance Committee in the first quarter to go figure out how we're going to actually identify all this stuff, as opposed to trying to sort of, throw darts tonight, right? Or this next couple of weeks.
Correct.
I think that's a pragmatic and sensible idea, right? And, what we do relative to not just the auditor's office, but every other office and so forth, as holistically, I think makes sense. I guess so. My reaction is to this is in a couple of areas. First of all, we toss around jargon words like fiscal responsibility and cost effectiveness and efficiency, and some helpful diagrams and so forth for this stuff. But the reality is that this year we are online to spend $8 million more on pensions than we have, okay? And we're going to spend that this year, okay? And we don't have any money to pay for it. And so the way that we fund that is we write an IOU that our children will have to pay for, right? And by the time they have to pay that, it's not really going to be $8 million, because it's going to accrue interest at 7% a year. It's going to be $30 or $40 million by the time our children have to pay that back, okay? So they will pay in the future for services that we are consuming now, okay? So, and there's a lot of concern in the community that things are so expensive here that our children may not be able to live here. Well, maybe that's a good thing for them, okay, if this happens, right? So I think it's important to understand that that's what we're talking about here. Oh, it's not abstract. And where's Gennady? Gennady, are you listening? Right? This business of maybe CalPERS will lower their discount rate in the future, and this is insurance, that is not the reality. The reality is we are spending $8 million more on pensions than we have, okay, in this budget. So everybody needs to be clear on that. We need to dig our way out of this hole, okay? And it's not some future kind of thing. It's now, and somebody's going to pay for it, and it's going to be our kids, okay? So with that context, right, the other thing that I think we should all understand is, we're talking about $5 million here. And, we have to be careful that we're not going to end up with draconian service cuts, okay, if we try to do this right away, okay? But $5 million in the general fund, that's 2% of the general fund, okay? So we're saying that if we do this the wrong way, we're going to have draconian service cuts for 2% of the general fund. Well, it's not impossible But, you know, I think the process that you're suggesting, that we do some due diligence on that, makes sense, because it's, you know, it's sort of not the obvious conclusion. In terms of process, you know, one way to do this, right, is that every department manager, we go to every department manager and we ask her to cut 2% out of her budget, okay? That would work, okay? I think most of us who've been around understand that that's not typically the best way to do something like this, but it could be done, right? So I think it's important here that we don't kick the can down the road, that if we're going to go down the process that the city manager is recommending, and it makes sense, right, we got to really do it. And the issues that you're bringing up about the community and the Palo Alto process and, you know, picking up animals versus this kind of stuff, I mean, we're going to have to do that, right? And it's a community thing, so everybody should understand that, okay? But, again, we're spending $8 million more than we have, okay? You wouldn't run your household finances this way, okay? So we got to actually go do this. It can't just be kick the can down the road.
Go ahead, Councilman Tanaka.
So I guess what I'm hearing from the city manager is that even though we have this $8 million deficit, actually it's more than 8 million, but something on that order, that we should not do it this year, not do the cuts this year, but do it next year. Is that what you're saying?
No.
What are you saying?
Well, first of all, the committee did not say, it asked me to look for $8 million in reductions. It asked us to look at half of that. So I think the committee's, at least last week, the direction was, how do we begin to make this payment systematically, not just one time, but structurally, at 50%, essentially $4 million.
Yeah, I guess
And so I am proposing that you can do that. I'm just saying that we can't get micro about where it's going to happen, and we need to have a deeper discussion about what the impacts of making those changes would be than we're able to present to you today in detail.
Okay, but I guess what I'm hearing is that you're proposing that we kick the can down the road for this $4 million.
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, you say you're saying that we still do it for this budget cycle.
I think there are ways that the council could, the committee could think about how to make concrete your direction to us so that you can ensure that, this isn't just a matter of approving the budget just exactly as it is, and then we're going to continue to talk about this, so.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just trying to understand whether you're proposing we start chipping away at this deficit this year or next year. And it sounds like you're not saying either. You're just saying that we should have a process for this.
No, did you?
May I take a stab at
Yeah.
this?
Thank you. What I heard the manager saying is the budget process doesn't begin and end at adoption of the budget. The adoption of the budget sets the budget for the fiscal year, but then we start implementing that budget over the course of that fiscal year, including mid-year changes or refinements to it. And so during the course of implementing the budget, we can look at refining it.
Okay. So you're saying that we should.
In partnership
so-
with the committee.
Okay, so what the city manager is proposing is that, because this is too hard of a problem, that we adopt the budget as is and then start looking at making changes.
No, I explicitly
Okay.
said that is not what I'm saying.
Okay, what are you saying?
There are ways you could look at, is there a credit you want to take against the budget right now that makes it concrete as a directive to us? That there's $4 million that will not be in this budget until we have answered this question? Is it going to go to maintain services in the budget exactly as proposed, or is it going to allow us to make a 115 trust contribution this year, beginning this year, towards this unfunded pension liability?
Okay, I just want to understand,
Yeah.
what the feedback was. Because I think,
So did you understand now what I'm saying?
I think so.
I think the finance committee could figure out a way to think about reducing the proposed budget that I have proposed in such a way that allows us to have the time that we will need organizationally, on the council and with our community to be able to report on what the implications of that change are, rather than just, I would say it'd be, sorry, I'm going to be flippant here. It sounds, I don't mean it to be irresponsible to just say, here's $4 million. I'm saying you can figure out, you can make this concrete. I want you to think about how to do that, and then allow for us to be able to account for and report on how we're going to implement that. And it clearly can't be done in this time frame. We can't do that in this time frame.
Can I try asking this as a question to make sure I understand it? Right? It says, the budget as proposed in the general fund is $214 million. And so what you're saying is that we adopt a $210 million budget, right? Top line, but how we move that around inside is yet to be determined.
Yeah, Lalo, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. I mean, we've thought about this a little bit. I mean,
I think what you described, Vice Mayor, is exactly probably it. What council does from, our Muni Code standpoint is they adopt ultimately an appropriation ordinance. And so what we could do is reduce the ordinance amount in the general fund, right? So from 214 million to 210 million, and essentially put a negative reserve. And then say the impacts of this is to be determined at a later conversation.
yeah, I think the good way to think about it really is a budget is just a plan.
Yeah.
And the formal action the council takes is actually the appropriation ordinance. And that ordinance, the appropriation ordinance is an authorization to spend. And so what we're saying is you could say, we are restricting your authorization to spend to $210 million because we have this unknown $4 million. And that will allow us the time to say, if you want to spend any of that $4 million, we've got to come back to finance and get the okay, essentially, that either says, here's the changes and reductions you're going to make, and therefore we're going to spend this whole $4 million we're going to make this whole contribution this year to the PARs, and we would go ahead and amend the ordinance and say, spend $4 million on that. Or if we're unable to do that, you would have to okay it. So you effectively have done that. And that is the responsible way to do it, as opposed to going in and asking me to amend the appropriation ordinance and make premature reductions in individual budgets that we can't account for. So you are putting it's like you're putting a governor on the engine of the general fund that just slows it down to $210 million.
Let me add another component to give you some other assurances. Let's say that our projected revenues come in higher than expected. We can't spend those dollars without the council authorization to increase the expenditure side. So we are literally restricted to the 210. Come June 30th, we'll run out of money if we don't come up with ideas somewhere in April or May.
Okay. Sound like the federal government.
I hope that clarifies what we're saying.
Yeah, I think that's good, because I think it's really important that we address this problem. I think it's very easy for us to say, let's wait till next year. So that's helped clarifies what you're trying to say.
So I think what you're proposing is a good idea. What I'm really hearing you say is, let's, at the top line, as Councilmember Filseth, or Vice Mayor Filseth said, let's do $210 million. There's a $4 million credit, a negative credit, so to speak, which means, and then you'll come to finance in the first quarter of the new fiscal year, and we'll go through the process of evaluating each of these possible cuts and thoughts, and we'll move forward and see if we can find them or approve them. Is that basically the thought?
That's certainly generally, I think, the degree of how much review you're going to want to do. I mean, I think you want to provide the policy and the value. I mean, you're the ones who represent the community, and our job is to try to represent the impacts on the organization and what it would take, and I think we'll meet together. Now, I just want to say one last thing. I think what the committee wants to do, and I'm saying this to our employees, okay, really, what the committee wants to do is not some mean-spirited, let's just cut the city budget kind of issue. It is exactly the opposite. And as Councilmember, Vice Mayor Philseth was saying, right, that there is a cost that we are ignoring if we don't take this on, and it will really bite us in the future. And as you have said in these meetings, it would undermine benefits that our employees are counting on if we don't deal with this. And so I completely agree with the need to do this. At the same time, getting from here to there should be thoughtful so that the impacts on our services and what we do in the community are done in the best possible way and not precipitously. And in that sense, I agree with the comment that in one sense, it's not a lot of money, it's 2%. We can figure out how to do it, but there is some process we need to go through so that we're clear about what that is. And I think we can do all of those things.
So I wanted to go back to the process that we really did in 2010 when we had the Great Recession. We cut $20 million out of our budget. We did it with really no layoffs. I mean, my recollection is that pretty much everyone kept their job. And there was some, I don't recall all, you can help, but there was some positions that were open that we got rid of, like we did with the fire department, where the positions were open. And we ended up with no service cuts in the community that anyone really noticed. I mean, that's sort of how I would say it.
It's a powerful observation you share, Mr. Chair, and as a newcomer to Palo Alto, I would offer the observation in the months that I've been working here and trying to understand where we're at as an organization. What I've learned is we are still under the level of number of employees that we were before the Great Recession. So as the economy has recovered, the organization has built back up some of its productivity and service delivery,
Well,
but
that's questionable. Some of it's productivity, or it's just more people? I mean, we outsourced a lot.
Right,
So, I
and
mean,
so yes, and spending on contracts as well. So that's occurred, but part of what I've witnessed in the last week, based on the staff research in response to the committee's direction, was we're not finding the fat to cut, and cutting into bone is never fun for staff to do, and I think never fun for any elected body to grapple with, which is one of the reasons why we were showing you that Venn diagram of the things in those circles are going to need to shrink, and those are going to be really tough choices for us to grapple with, because I'm not sure we're going to find any easy answers for you all. So having this substantive work in front of us is part of, I think, what we're trying to communicate here.
no, and I'm not making light of it. I mean, I wanted to say, though, that I think it is important to look back, and I think there was a lot of fat in the organization in 2009 and 2008. I really do. And I think we went through and cut $20 million. At the time, the city manager did an amazing job. I actually really would commend you on the way you handled that. You put together a road show. You actually went out in the community. You explained things. You came up with a bunch of cuts that I would call efficiency cuts, where people didn't notice it. You did offer up some cuts that we said no to. We did not cut the crossing guards. We did not cut a bunch of other things. I just can't remember what the patrol. There was probably 10 things we didn't cut that you talked about, and those were the things that mattered to people. I was a little concerned in this when I see, I forget what you had on it here, but, reduce expenses, we talk about, what was it? You had it in here. It was summer special events, summer concerts, and library hours. In 2010, we particularly protected those areas. I don't see us cutting special events, summer concerts, library hours, things that the average person in Palo Alto actually will notice. So I think I at least would not support those things. I do think the city manager made a really good observation. And we, for instance, if license plate readers will save us a bunch of money in the way we do parking enforcement, it is foolish not to do that. I think there's a lot of those, what I call efficiency solutions, that may exist out there that we haven't done. I still think we should talk about having cameras in our garages. How does that affect the need for a special officer to patrol our garages? And I mean, you made good points. These are things you need to think about, think through the ramifications, and do it. But that's really the way we should handle a lot of this first. I mean, I don't think we should be cutting into, as you put it dramatically, bone. I don't think that's what this is about. We are talking about 2% of the budget, as Vice Mayor Filseth says. 2% of the budget, we should figure out ways to do this without causing any issues in the community in terms of lower service levels. I don't think we need to. Now, there is a difference between white shoe service level and a service level that is, most people will not notice the difference, some people will, but for the majority of people, that is good enough. And that's obviously a difficult issue. I forget, I think, did we move towards sweeping the streets?
Yeah, we
Right?
reduced our street sweeping. We were sweeping, every week or whatever, and we basically cut it in half. I don't think you've gotten any real calls about
I will
street
say I have
sweeping.
gotten not a single call. Now, I mean, that's not something we did lightly. I mean, I actually remember thinking about it and thinking, are we going to cause more backups in the storm drains? Are we going to lower the quality of life in Palo Alto on these issues? So, I mean, I think that's a thoughtful discussion we had, and I think we made the right decision. And I think there's things like that we really need to think long and hard about. I don't think, though, that we should discuss cutting summer concerts, library hours, special events, crossing guards. I think there's a different discussion, and it's really an interesting one, about who should pay for what between us and the school district. That's a very different discussion. We clearly need all the crossing guards in this community we have. Who should pay for what? We do subsidize the school district. Education is a really important value in this community, and we may decide as a community and as a council that supporting education by subsidizing the school district is the way we want to go. Or we may decide that the school district, frankly, has a better ability to raise money and really should pay their fair share of crossing guards. And, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I do think we've been talking about Cubberley since I've been on this council. We did was it a blue ribbon task force that we put together? A blue ribbon task force. We had everyone come together. And I have personally lost faith that we will ever come to an agreement with the school district of a way to master plan the site. And so I think we need to realistically ask ourselves, is the status quo acceptable? Should we take our 8 acres and build a great community facility? Or, is there a third, or shall we just continue to talk or what? But I mean, I don't think people are happy with the status quo, and I actually don't think we've moved Cubberley forward much. We did do the incremental thing where we no longer pay them not to develop the site.
Right, we shifted that 1.8 million on the covenant not to develop. We basically put that in a capital sinking fund, and we do use portion of that each year for maintenance at Cubberley, so that's a positive thing. But again, for the most part, we are maintaining a lot of decrepit buildings and some other things. Obviously, we all know there is a vision from the city perspective that could say there could be an amazing community serving facilities and things at Cubberley, and we're sort of stuck.
Right. And I think we are stuck. And I think that's, that's been a really difficult, long-term place to be stuck. So I do think that your approach is probably the thoughtful and the good one. I mean, I do think we need to think carefully about what gets cut. And really, only you guys can do the staff work. We're not staff. And look at it and say, you know, this is what needs to be done, or these are the options. I would encourage you not to bring back anything that you think is cutting into bone. I don't know if I speak for the rest of you, but I don't think anyone really wants to take those kind of approaches. I don't even want to cut into muscle. You know, so when you think about it, think about, you know, I mean, I think your license plate reader one is a really good thing. And there's probably a whole bunch of technology that we could deploy to make ourselves more efficient, and that we really haven't thought about as a community, that we need to have those discussions. And when you put it in terms of money, things become much more clear. You know, if you save X number of dollars by doing this, and we will have better parking enforcement and all of that, or you can have the concern, and here is the privacy issues we would have, that, you know, we're not collecting and storing this data and passing it on, we're not selling it, it's basically purely used for that, and then we get rid of it, you know, on a daily basis, or whatever works in terms of, you know, the citations and all of that. I mean, I think coming forward with a plan to allay any fears of that kind of stuff, and I think that would be true with cameras in the parking garages. You don't want to implicate anyone's privacy, really, but on the other hand, you want people to be safe, and you can balance those, I think, in a really thoughtful manner. So I am probably going to be supportive of what the city manager is suggesting, because I do think this is a really important conversation, and I like the idea of the credit, and I like the idea that we will have this. And then, I know I'm saying a lot, and then I really did want to reassure the employees of the city that this is not, as I said, you know, I'm not interested in cutting into bone, not interested in cutting into muscle, really just making things more efficient and protecting their pensions long term. I mean, that's really what this is about. This is about, and I think Councilmember Filseth says it far more articulately than I do, but every year that we pretend that we're not spending $8 million, that $8 million becomes, over 30 years, did you say 40 million? 30 or $40 million, yeah. Right? That's every year. So what'll happen is, if we don't deal with it now, the problem will become so big that, you know, we will have to make draconian cuts in the city. And what you really want to do is you want to deal with these problems incrementally, so you don't have long-term pain before you can't deal with it. And that's really what we're talking about. And that's why we as a committee didn't suggest to you, go make 8 million in cuts. I think 8 million in cuts would be too hard. What we said is, think about, you know, half of that. And, you know, how much of that half we actually do will depend on what the options are, and, you know, how much, you know, what it looks like. And we can't do that in a vacuum. So I don't think any employees have to worry about losing their jobs or any of that at this point. I don't think that's where that's going. I think we're looking at things being more efficient over the long term. And I would say, remind people that in 2010, I don't believe that we laid anyone off.
I just add that, you know, in the long term, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if we don't deal with this today, it will be much, much worse in the future. And I think people ought to understand, too, that, you know, you've got agencies around the state, not very many now, but in 30 years, who knows? You've got agencies in the state that are basically defaulting on some of those obligations, right? So, you know, everybody's going to be at risk if we don't deal with this now. Community, employees, businesses, everybody.
I just want to say one thing. You know, you don't see it, but on the smaller agencies, we just actually had an agency come to BCDC, that Bay Conservation Development Commission, that one of their contractors had caused a bunch of fill to get into the bay, and it was going to cost $50,000 to clean it up. Due to their obligations over time, pension obligations, other things, they were going to be unable to basically move forward, and so they were going to get bought out and reorganized by the state of California. And you're seeing that with a lot of the smaller agencies whose obligations are now bigger than what they can handle. And they're being mopped up and moved into some other organization that has more money. But at some point, there's no more organization that has more money, and that ability is going to fail if people don't start thinking about it. And so we have an obligation as trustees of the city to really figure out how we make Palo Alto work. And one of the things that I have noticed, is we may be a very rich city compared to other cities. But on the other hand, our pension obligations per person are much higher.
We're in the high end.
We're in the high end of all of that. A lot of cities have much lower unfunded liability costs than we do. So I think we can't just say, well, we're better than everyone else, so we'll be the last people to fall on this, because I don't think that's true. I think pretty soon it'll start eating into our flexibility to do two things. One, for our employees, to give them market wage adjustments. If we don't deal with a pension issue, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to be competitive. And if you're worried about your salaries, growing in a fair manner, we need to deal with this issue. And then also services for the rest of the community. And frankly, since the employees provide the services, when we say we can't provide the services, that means jobs. So, everyone has an interest in making this work. So that's really the little speech I want to give.
Great. So just along those lines, if I could just sort of add in some things and maybe some metaphors that we can use as we go forward here. In a lot of ways, so it's interesting. I totally agree with you about the summer concert series. The difficulty is, everybody's bone's a little bit different too. You know what I mean? So when we were. And I had this very same conversation when we were talking with community services, and they had a whole list of things. And I said, because summer concert series, really, every year we try to do that. People come out and we just put this back in. What are we doing? They said, well, Jim, you just need to understand we're community services. Everything we do serves the community. And almost anything we're going to give, there's somebody going to say, why are you doing that? So it's just sort of, that wasn't the point, and I partly just put that in because it was back on the list and we do it every year, but it's an interesting way to realize the fact that, there's somebody out there on any of the community-facing things that people are concerned about often. That being said, I want to go back to one of Michelle's earlier comments, and the default thing is to do the hidden stuff that sounds easy, that isn't necessarily easy. So we don't want to take the siding off the house, but we're more than happy to start pulling the two-by-fours out of the frame slowly, burning them for firewood, and not knowing it. And honestly, this is not just fake. I'll give you two examples of this. So we say, for example, gosh, we got to make a lot more investment in technology and doing some other stuff. So one of the things we have on the list is actually cutting some of our technology funding on staff. We say, well, there's some good things, and that's not immediately evident, and yet ultimately does that come back to bite us in some way? The other piece of it is, to the extent that we need to really change some of our processes and be able to be more efficient and use different technologies and things like that, that change effort takes time, and that means you have to still maintain the status quo environment. So again, perfect example, heard Nielsen, I see he's back there, he's come in here on this, which is we need to have a much better parking permit system. We've got a big plan to invest a whole bunch of money, develop that system, deploy it. While we're in the process of doing that, we have to maintain the old system that we have, whether it's, people doing stuff by hand or whatever. We don't suddenly say, we're not issuing any more permits, see you in 18 months when we've got this all done. So we have an old-fashioned way of doing stuff in the town from before that we have to maintain until we have made a transition. And so when we then say, well, don't cut the technology thing, just cut some of those account clerks or whatever it is we have in ASD that we don't see, and that ASD gave me some things that they could look at not doing with the target, and we go, well, wait a minute, there are implications to us doing that until we can transition. So all I'm saying is these things are complicated. They're not complicated in the sense of they stop us from doing things, but it does mean we've got to identify them in advance is preferable. And even the best job we do, anybody who's done any sort of change, trying to change anything, realizes, I don't care what it is, you remodel your house. Yeah, sure, it'll take 3 months to do it, and it's always 8 months, New things come up. But we have an obligation as professionals to be as predictive as we possibly can. And again, that's what we're just asking you for. And the other thing is this. We will have, and you know this, we will have this challenge. I mean, human beings, we're great at postponing stuff, right? I mean, we have all sorts of issues right now that are issues in our community, mostly because we're moving from the way things were to some future state, which is necessary, but that process of the change is there. I don't care whether it's our bike pedestrian boulevards. I guarantee you 10 years from now, stuff that is creating us great angst will more likely than not be absolutely celebrated in this community. And yet the process of going through that change is tough. My mom could never quit smoking until she had a diagnosis, an incurable diagnosis, and she quit smoking, like many people do. And you go, what is the point? Why do you quit smoking at that point? Why didn't you quit smoking when you knew it? And I hate to say it, so not the most accurate analogy. The Great Recession, in the way government typically works, and business too, but government is, we don't really make the changes until you get so whacked that you're forced, and so that's why we have this ridiculous up and down cycle thing. And so it's clear, even though I will say, when I came here, I was new, lots of our employees were blaming me for the Great Recession, and we made this all up as a way to cut the organization. But that was an outside thing. This is more difficult, right? We're talking about something we can see very clearly that says, my God, we have a real $8 million bill, not some proposed one. And so we've got to also work to have people understand, you know what? We are overspending in some current areas right now that are keeping us from our ability to pay this bill that that is really a higher priority than a lot of things we're doing. And how we get people both inside and outside the organization to understand that's necessary. We just need to make sure, again, we understand that we need to have conversations and a little bit of process. I'm not talking about the full Palo Alto process. I'm just talking about a normal change management thing. So that's my comment. Again, I'll take the parking permit system. That'll probably take us a year or so to onboard, train. We're going to keep some of the old things in parallel, and ultimately the cost savings come in the future, even though during the transition sometimes change costs us more. That's just the fact of life. So when the council says cut that out and to do it and recognize the savings immediately, that doesn't always happen. It happens. Some of those changes happen in the future too.
In 2010, the budget cuts, how much of the infrastructure projects were part of it? I mean, I don't know, what was transpiring back in 2010. So did we have as much infrastructure projects that were identified and needed to be done that we needed to budget for compared to now?
Well, I just real quickly, I think that's a really good question.
I'm just saying, let's compare apples to apples versus, apples to bananas or something like that. I realize pension is always going to be on an upward trend, and always looking at personnel to cut first is wrong. Is looking at what is the programs we have, whether we're leveraging them correctly, and then also at the same time, what are some of our infrastructure, the big monies that we're going to be spending? Are we spending it right? Are we making the right determination on how big, how small, whatever it needs to be? But it might require us to take a step back and review all these projects that we have put in 2014 as something that we need to have done. And what is it that's going to benefit our community? I mean, so I think, we're at this point where the economy hasn't fallen down or anything like that, but it's time that, given we have this $8 billion gap here, we need to kind of look at it and review instead of just plowing ahead. So my question, I mean, I don't know what was that 2010 budget, but
Well, there's just two things, good comments. A couple of thoughts. I mean, so one of the things that, particularly when we get to $8 million, to what extent is there sort of ongoing contributions to infrastructure that would be part of what we would adjust? That would be something we would look at. That's different than the idea of cutting a particular project that only gives us a one-time savings. It just doesn't give us a structural saving, and that's what you are after. But I think the more interesting parallel is we actually weren't spending as much on infrastructure before the Great Recession. And as a matter of fact, there's some parallels with the infrastructure issue and the pension issue, which is the city had delayed paying attention to its infrastructure for a long period of time. And that's what the whole Blue Ribbon Task Force spent its time on. And so what we have been doing since then has been a very significant reinvestment in the community, much of which has been trying to catch up with things that weren't dealt with then, and now also proactively trying to deal with them in the future in a way that will really sustain us. So I see it very similar as to the request to, in many ways, to looking at how do we start to pay the pension bill. I mean,
Right, they're actually really related. So bad budgeting process, which is what Palo Alto was doing, I think, for 20 years beforehand, was you basically ignore keeping up with your infrastructure. You let your roads and your sidewalks fall apart, and you don't really invest in things. And then, I mean, I'll just use our boardwalk out in the bay. You watch, you don't put the maintenance into that, it falls apart. And then fortunately, we were rebuilding it. I think the Palo Alto 20 years ago would have just taken that boardwalk out, not rebuilt it. And if you don't go ahead and invest in your infrastructure, that's the easiest thing to cut when you have budget issues. And if you cut your infrastructure spending, you make your community worse and decaying over the long term. And that is something that we really looked at hard in 2010 and said, people are really upset with the quality of our roads, the quality of our sidewalks, the general quality of our infrastructure, and we need to invest in the community. And when you look at this investment in infrastructure, you often get to the stage where people say, let's cut infrastructure and let's give raises. Let's cut infrastructure and let's, provide more social services. Let's cut infrastructure and provide something else. And that's a really bad way to run a city long-term, because you end up with a crumbling infrastructure that costs you far more to address those issues at some point than if you just kept up. And that's really what that whole Blue Ribbon Task Force was about, to identify, okay, we've been underinvesting in infrastructure. What do we need to do to catch up, keep up? And then I forget the third thing we said. It was catch up, keep up, and, right. There you go. Drink up.
it automatically comes up from his subconscious.
Exactly.
I
just
knew
want-
the city manager was a bony guy. I didn't realize he'd brought the recession with him.
Oh, yeah, we know all Jim King did that.
I'm just saying that, there is differences and, yes, infrastructure was a big point that we do have to keep up with. At the same time, I don't want to look at our human, the employee side as something that we first go to. Even through the years, we're dealing with a much more difficult system where everything you implement, there's an impact to it. And so therefore, I think that looking forward, we really have to explore different ways of revenue in order to find ways to fund all these kind of things. Every time there is a reaction or impact to something that we implement as a policy, such as in development or even with parking, there are impacts over there, and that's an added cost that was not even thought about back in 2010. So I think that now, moving forward, we just have to be careful and really leverage every means of collecting revenue or even recovery costs. But I just don't want to go to our staff. We're running in a sense, I feel like we are running a company, and the employees are key to ensuring that we do have smooth operations. I see the boots on the ground working out there in 100-degree heat, and they're still doing it to make sure our services go on. So I want to give recognition to them as well and what they're relying on. So hopefully, as we move forward, we streamline and we look at all the programs that we have and ensure that they're run efficiently and cost-effectively. I mean, there are words that come out that sounds nice and everything, but we really have to look at it more carefully. In addition to the business registry, I'm not really even sure where it's at. So we can't just look at residents as somebody who's always going to be investing in our community. There's also the business aspect of that. So I'm hoping that we can further look into all those and explore those. Thanks.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, so one thing that Jim mentioned that we didn't talk about, which I think we should, is, so this is only about 200 million of our 700-something million dollar overall budget. And so while we're looking at talking about the general fund per se, I think it actually makes sense for us to actually understand our pension liabilities for all the funds, because other funds also have the same issue. And look at how do we start chipping away at that deficit, because that's as big of a problem as we have as our general fund. In fact, the rest of the funds are much bigger than our general fund. It's like 500 million versus just 200 million. So I think that's something that we should also do. I don't know if staff has what is our pension deficit for our other funds, but Lalo, do you want to?
So based on the 7%, it's $504 million, and 67% of that is general fund.
Okay, so I guess how much deficit do we have this year in the other funds combined? Not including the general fund. So the general fund, 8 million. What is our deficit this year?
I would have to look it up. I think Kylie's looking it up to see if we have it. You're asking at the 6.2.
Yeah, doing the same thing we're doing for the general fund. What is our
So it's a ballpark, it should be.
Another 12.5 for the remaining funds.
12.5? Okay, so
No, all funds.
I'm sorry, that's all.
Yeah, it'd be about half of, it's a little more than half of.
You're going to say it's
addition.
proportionate to
Yeah.
what the total, yeah.
Right.
So it's about 1/3 other funds, 2/3 general fund. And that's because public safety's a big part of it, and that's in the general fund.
yeah, so okay, so if it's 12.5 for the total and it's 8 million for the general fund, that means it's 4.5 for the rest of the funds. So that's good, right? So as a percentage of the other funds, it's not as big of a item, which is great. So, we took the move of trying to align or stop digging ourselves into a hole on the general fund, which is great. So we're going halfway, which is better than nothing. I propose that we do the same thing for the rest of the funds. It's a lot easier actually this time. So it's only 4.5 out of 500 million. So it's like 1%. We could also try doing just half of that. So while for the general fund, we're trying to get halfway. I think for the rest of our funds, we should also go halfway as well. And so I think in the process, what we'll do then is look at what are 4 million of possible cuts for the general fund, and then 1.25%. Actually, no, wait, no, that'd be 2.25% for the rest of the funds. 2.25 million. Yeah, 2.25 million, yeah, for the rest of the funds.
Councilmember Tanaka, that's why it was on the second bullet of the slide. Yeah.
I know, that's why I bring it up.
Yeah,
because you guys
no,
brought it up.
we're saying that's what we're going to look at as well. So we can bring you that.
Okay, so are you proposing that when we approve the budget, that we approve the budget at 210 million for the general fund, and then what's the rest of the, I didn't bring my book. What is the rest of?
Well, we have a lot of different funds, so, I mean, it's not like one just non-general fund. They're all over the place. So
Okay,
we
well, I
could-
think our budget total is $704 million, right? That's what the total is. So 704 million minus 4 for the general fund, minus 2.25 for the rest of the half of the pension deficit. So that would take us down to 697.75, right?
Well,
Roughly.
so conceptually, I don't think this is the way to run an airline, honestly. I mean, I think the intent is clear. We need to include these other funds. How do we do that, right? I think clearly we have a bigger challenge in the general fund for lots of reasons, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, we have revenue control in the other funds that we don't have in the general fund. And I wouldn't say we should automatically take these costs as cuts in those other funds when it's.
Well, I guess I'm not saying that either. I guess what I'm
Okay.
trying to say is, so we're running about $4.5 million negative in our other funds combined per year, right? And it's going to keep growing, as the vice mayor says, unless we deal with it. And yeah, some of this can be handled through either cuts, or some of this can be handled through, aligning, more cost recovery approaches. But I guess my main point is, I think it's great that we're addressing this on the general fund, but like you have on your slide here, I think it makes sense for us to also make steps towards the other funds, because the other funds are also, $4.5 million is also a lot of money.
We don't disagree with you. I think what we're saying is a different structure for the enterprise funds, let's pick them, because they have reserves. And so we could make it an accommodation in the short term and fix it. And then it has what Jim's trying to say. We're going to come back to you and say, here are the impacts on the longer term, because your rate may go up X% now as we make this adjustment ongoing. So you don't need to be as precise with those funds as you might want to with the general fund, and I think that's fine, because we ourselves recognize it. Part of our strategy has been to contribute the same amounts for all funds. That's the recommendations we've done with you without a formal policy. And so part of our desire is to continue that. We don't want to have funds contributing at different levels. We want to have the same.
We actually kind of can't do this. We can't sort of say, what, we're just going to take contributions from the general fund that's going to sort of go towards the unfunded liability for all employees. Say, no, that's not even accurate. We have to have all of the funds contributing equally as it relates to their thing. And that's what your point is. What we're saying is that the choices and the challenges are more complex in the general fund, given the restrictions that we have, and in a sense, the array of services that we have. And the committee wants to be sure that it actually makes an adjustment to the proposed city manager budget now to ensure that we have that conversation. There's no similar need to make, in my view, a recommendation across the other funds at a dollar amount and say reduce the overall budget by that amount, partly because we have more flexibility on how we can address it. I would suggest that the Finance Committee's motion make explicit that you want us to apply the same cost recovery across the other funds as you're directing us to pursue for the general fund. But we don't need to reduce the spending authority as proposed right now, because we have so much more
Well,
flexibility.
it might be a combination, right? It might be some expense control, it might be also some revenue recovery. So I think, I'm with you at this. I don't think it has to be all expense control. And also, I don't think it has to be all revenue recovery. I'm not sure, right? It may be a
That's right,
combination.
right. Well, all I'm saying is, the suggested motion or whatever that I heard was actually look at budgeting a credit right now. And I think we need to do that in the general fund. I don't think we need to do that for the other funds, because we don't know if it's going to be a credit or we're going to, increase revenues. And we have more than enough flexibility in the short term to deal with that. We can pay all of our bills.
If I could add perhaps one other perspective to that, kind of representing at least some of the enterprise involved here, I would certainly reiterate that we feel the same level of responsibility and concern about, needing to address the long-term liabilities in the enterprises as well. I think the real question is where the committee should spend its time going forward, let's say over this first quarter of the next year, because many of the strategies that we're talking about for the general fund also will affect the enterprises, especially as it relates to, administrative operations and personnel related elements. It's just asking Lalo, how many funds are there? So it's at least 13 that could potentially be, if you weren't to take them one at a time, that you'd want to potentially look at. And so it really would not make sense in the, given the level of complexity and the variety of issues that Jim was pointing out, to tackle it kind of simultaneously. It really does make sense to focus on the general fund with the understanding that many of these strategies do apply. But again, really want to reiterate that the level of urgency and importance is as much in the enterprise as it is in the general fund.
Okay, great. Sounds like we have good alignment. The only issue, though, is how do we account for it? So I think Vice Mayor Vilsa's has had a great idea for the general fund, right, in terms of how we handle that. How do we handle it for the rest of the funds? How do we account for that we want to try to chip away at least at half of this, like we are for the general fund? How do we account for it?
When you, we'll give you some ideas if you don't have a motion at some point. And I think all you need to say is, and to include the enterprise funds when we return, a specific plan for the enterprise funds when we return.
Yeah.
We don't think you need to adjust the budget at this point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, we had a bunch of public
Let's work
speakers.
on the,
Sorry, Councilmember Scharf. We also wanted to have Harriet, as Jim mentioned, give you a couple of comments as part of the presentation.
I think I'm going to go to the public. Okay. Then we can do that. We have, basically we have, at least Harriet to talk possibly. We have the library, we have Public Works, so I wanted to get the public speakers.
We had a few questions, yeah.
And we had a few questions, correct.
We asked staff to come back with answers.
Yeah, there's a couple items in the parking lot.
All right, so our first speaker is Jordan Jansen, to be followed by Renata Kashros. Where's? And you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Jordan Jansen. I'm a resident of Stanford, California. I am a Bay Area native. I went to UC Berkeley and have a master's degree in public administration from Columbia. I'm a program performance auditor with the City of San Jose. And I'm sort of here today to offer my perspective as a young professional who's been working in government for a number of years now and looking to continue my career in government. So many community members and friends that I speak to don't know that the audit function is something that exists. There's a lot of skepticism and lack of faith in government in general. They're always shocked and impressed to learn that there is a function like this in cities like Palo Alto and San Jose. And opportunities like this in the public sector are far and few between, especially in the Bay Area. And we need to protect positions like this. So partly because faith is in government right now is low, and people don't believe that government can be transparent or self-critical. But this work is evidence that that is not true, that government can be self-critical. And I do think what happened on the May 15th meeting is sort of plays into a lot of the fears that and skepticism of government that I hear from the community in general. So consultants tend to write reports and leave. They can be useful in some instances, but I think this is one in particular where they are cannot offer the same services. What drew me and many of my colleagues to local auditing in the city of San Jose and this profession is that the model is different. Unlike consultants, after an audit, we don't leave. We follow up on the report. We work with the departments to find viable solutions that work for residents. Because it is our community, which is not the case with consultants. I sincerely hope, it sounds like Councilmember Koo has reconsidered her vote, and I hope the rest of the council will also reconsider. Good government is possible and change can happen from within. Eliminating this office communicates to voters that I believe that you do not value accountability and transparency. And this type of work is invaluable and contributes to having an efficient and effective local government. I believe Councilmember Scharf, you mentioned in your comments earlier about efficiency solutions. I believe that this work in particular can be extremely helpful in identifying efficiency in government and possible solutions and following up and make sure those changes happen. So again, I'd like you to please reconsider and make a decision that places residents first.
Okay, now we have Renata Kushro Lowers, I apologize if I mangled it.
You got it right. Good morning. My name is Renata Koshru-Lowers, and I worked as a performance auditor in the Palo Alto City Auditor's Office from 2002 through 2008, and then again for the City of San Jose Auditor's Office from 2009 through 2016. I want to thank you for your discussion this morning, acknowledging that maybe it's a good idea to take a little more time to think about the decisions that you're making with regard to the Auditor's Office. I was deeply disappointed about the rushed Finance Committee vote on May 15th to eliminate 5 of the 6 employees in the City Auditor's Office. Before I worked for Palo Alto, I worked for a firm that provided outsourced performance audit work to multiple jurisdictions. The work product that such firms produce is no match for the product that comes from in-house auditors with deep institutional and programmatic knowledge. A contracted firm's goal is to spend as little time as possible on site and issue a report as quickly as possible at the highest possible price. The people writing the reports will likely not have ever spent much time in Palo Alto and will know little about the city. Such reports typically focus on low-hanging fruit and often will not take into account the concerns of city programmatic staff or management. Working for Palo Alto was one of the most rewarding jobs I ever had. I had the opportunity to spend time to truly understand a public service and then make meaningful recommendations about programs as diverse as libraries, park maintenance, ambulance billing, recreation classes, and police and fire overtime. You are well aware that this is a wonderful community with a constituency that cares deeply about its public services and is highly engaged with regard to policymaking. It was an honor and a pleasure to work here. It was also an honor to be a part of the Palo Alto City Auditor's Office. It has historically been an award-winning national model for best practices with regard to public sector performance auditing. There are some very competent auditors with significant experience on staff in the Auditor's Office. To suggest, as was discussed at the May 15th Finance Committee meeting, that they are the cause of productivity issues and that this justifies eliminating all staff positions in the Auditor's Office is unfair when they are not part of the conversation. Perhaps there's more to the story than what has been brought public so far. I would encourage you to reconsider your vote to outsource the 5 of the 6 positions in the City Auditor's Office. This decision was made so quickly with little public notice or input. The employees who will lose their jobs deserve at least a fair public hearing. As City Manager Keene noted this morning, it's not been Palo Alto's practice historically to lay off people, to eliminate jobs which are filled. The city has always prided itself on treating its residents and employees with respect. Please let that continue to be that way. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Sharon Erickson.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Erickson. I'm a resident of, sorry, I'm nervous. As long as I've done this, I always get nervous. I've been a resident of Palo Alto virtually my whole life. I grew up here. I raised my children here, still live here, and had the great honor of being your city auditor from 2001 through 2008. Last Tuesday, I was so disappointed that after only a few minutes of discussion, the committee voted unanimously to eliminate 5 of the 6 positions in the Office of the Auditor and outsource all audit work. I'm here today to again ask you to rescind the decision. Palo Alto voters created the Palo Alto's independent Office of the City Auditor in 1983 to serve as an internal watchdog over city operations. For the last 35 years, the office has provided staff, council members, and the public with independent, objective performance audits of the efficiency and effectiveness of city services. Since 2002, it's also produced an annual report detailing performance results for all city programs. Altogether, it's an extraordinary body of audit work, covering everything from libraries to permitting to overtime use, produced by in-house auditors who have a stake in Palo Alto's success. In each of those cases, in-house auditors examined risks, controls, and service delivery methods. With a long-term perspective, they've documented problems and, working with department staff, crafted recommendations to address those problems. They're independent and in-house, so they're there to follow up on audit recommendations to ensure residents of Palo Alto actually see the benefits of recommended service improvements and cost savings. Having an independent Office of the City Auditor provides accountability and transparency over Palo Alto's programs and finances. The proposal to outsource all audit work to consultants ignores the value of independent in-house auditors who, unlike consultants, provide continuity of review and oversight. The auditors who would lose their jobs under this proposal have in-depth knowledge of city programs that would not be easily replaced. Outsourcing may sound like a good idea, but the city will likely end up with highly paid consultants who, as you've heard, will spend minimal time on site and gain only a limited understanding of city programs and services. Consulting firms issue reports and leave town. In-house staff develop expertise in city operations and provide ongoing oversight. This is not something we can afford to lose. Moreover, let me just say, this is not the time in the history, if I could just finish my sentence, I'd appreciate it. It's not the time in the history of our city or our country to diminish accountability in government. This is the time to support institutions like the City of Palo Alto's Auditor's Office, which was created to ensure honest, open, and efficient government that works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Nielsen Buchanan.
Thank you. As you know, I've lost count how many hours I've spent attending the Finance Committee meetings, and I've just finished another couple of hours. And I do it because it gives me the intellectual and emotional connection to what you're doing. And like it or not, Jim, I spend most of the time in your head because my background is pretty much your job.
Counseling is available.
Let me talk about a couple of structural things that you're talking about, and I like when you put these issues into a family context, and I'm going to try to give a couple of quick ones, and then I want to get to one line item in the budget. Mountain View and Cupertino are now knee-deep in a structural change in their communities of bringing the business tax to bear. Will they be successful? Who knows, but those waves will be breaking over the body's politic for the next little bit. That's just like a family situation when there's been one spouse working, and the family situation changes and the spouse has to go to work to get the kids through school or whatever. And I think it's time that you all in the hierarchy of city government invite a new spouse to the financial table of Palo Alto, and that's the business community. If those other two towns can bring in another stream of income that's new, and I think it's exactly a way to solve one of our structural problems. The school district is another opportunity to restructure. That's just like a family getting a kid through 4 years of school only to learn that you want to go to medical school, and they don't have the resources to do it. The family has to sit down and say, we're going to have to skin this cat in another way. We've had a working agreement with the school district, and it probably is not working out from what I'm learning during this process. That agreement needs to be restructured to both achieve the goal of the school and the city. But it suggests to me that that's a structural reformation that could go on. I've got others, but let me just go to the one thing that I want to brought out is the valet parking services. I'm still very confused. Is that $300,000 it is or isn't in the operating budget? I realize that we're talking about a 5-year budget that's damn close to $3 billion. So I'm very sensitive about standing up here and talking about valet parking. But valet parking is a linchpin, in my opinion, on the parking reforms that we want to have. It brings extra capacity in existing garages. The existing garages are not well utilized, and it's just silly not to take advantage of filling up the garages during this time period. It has political ramifications in the neighborhoods because we're getting word that more and more people are lobbying and want to put up the permits sold in the neighborhoods, and we don't see the the justice in that if there's capacity sitting in the commercial core. I don't want to go into all that because I don't even have all the facts. But don't be pound foolish and penny wise and pound foolish on using the garages fully. It's very related to the $27 million investment in the Hamilton Waverly garage. It's another opportunity to bring the business community into the problem-solving process. I strongly object to the city planning to fund the entire new garage on the parking lot. At the very least, the all-day permit parking in that garage should be funded by the business community the same way it funded the other garages. That saves tens of millions of dollars of your capital expenditure. Another structural change of sort of changing the rules on how the family's going to fund a vacation or a new house. So thank you for bearing with me. I truly understand the angst of all this down to the ranking lowest level employee. You're asking all the right questions, but you're going to have to make some real decisions in the little bit. And I hear everything. I mean, if you've been working all weekend, I know what that's like, and good luck.
Thank you, Nielsen. I think to answer Nielsen's question, though, we did put all the valet money back in.
That's correct.
So that's what we did.
And it's actually, when when Kylie shares the draft motion that staff has put together, that's explicitly called out about the continuity of the valet services continuing into FY19, as you had directed earlier.
Okay. The first thing I guess we can do Mike Sarter's office. Sure. We'll do the auditor. We'll do the auditor.
So let's talk about the list, I guess, of things to do. So we have, the library has a verbal report back to the full committee on, I think the questions were about library hours, as well as electronic content versus print materials. So they're ready to discuss that. In the Public Works Department, there were 2 items that were placed in the parking lot. One was the Urban Forest Master Plan funding for $150,000 and finding an offset, as well as information regarding the vehicle replacement and maintenance fund. Distributed today at your places is a memo that articulates for the Public Works Department a funding offset for the Urban Forest Master Plan, meaning we can fully fund the $150,000 on an ongoing basis while maintaining the 7-year tree trimming cycle. There's also just the information at your places regarding the vehicle maintenance fund, specifically about electric vehicles, as well as there's an attached list of the proposed vehicles that are included in the 5-year CIP plan. On the electric vehicles specifically, just so that everyone, since you all just got the memo today, electric vehicles, the staff anticipates piloting them to do a more thorough cost analysis of an electric vehicle versus the normal vehicles, at least from a sedan perspective. And so the next 2 sedans that are up for replacement, the department plans to go after doing an electric vehicle replacement. And that'll allow us to monitor the costs associated with those electric vehicles in comparison to our sedans. They're also looking at piloting, if we can find them, larger pickup trucks, but obviously the market is not as advanced on that type of vehicle as it is on sedans. So I'm not sure how much you want them to present additional information, or if we're okay with staff's recommendation and information in the memo.
Okay, well, let's take the Public Works Director first.
Perfect.
Why don't you come on up?
Sit up there.
Yep.
So what was the staff's recommendation on this? Just repeat it so it's clear.
On the
On the Public Works.
Urban Forest Master Plan?
Yes.
Sure. Mike can elaborate, I think.
Yes, good morning, Chair Scharf and the rest of the Finance Committee. I'm Mike Sarter, Public Works Director. So as you recall, in our meeting last week, we had proposed to continue with our tree trimming contract, adding some additional money to cover increases in costs for the services and not fund the Urban Forest Master Plan. After your direction to fund the urban forest master plan, we went back into our records and did a deep dive into the actual tree trimming cycle over the last 10 years. Turns out that we are, including with the increases in the last 3 years, at about a 6.7-year cycle over the last 10 years. So with that, we found that we don't need to increase the third year of our contract by, I think it was $177,000 originally. We can take $150,000 of that increase and put it into the fourth year of the urban forest master plan and still maintain a less than 7-year cycle.
Okay. So staff's recommendation is to do that, correct? That's correct. All right. Any discussion about staff's recommendation?
Thank you.
All right, I will move that we approve staff's recommendation on this item. In the Public Works Department. All right. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you for doing that. So you are done. You're out of the parking lot. Congratulations.
Awesome.
Or out of the parking lot into the pan.
Councilmember Philseth.
So
Yes.
we got this today at Places, right? Can I just request that we have a 10-minute to read this? I appreciate the reports, but I'd really like to read this before we go further. I really have.
I'm wondering, I'm not sure there's anything
Is
in
there
here
anything in here
that would be an issue for you. I think we could proceed as we're doing it, and then at the right time, maybe if you did take a break,
could take
that
a
would allow
5-minute
the
break
time
and
to
look at
read
it.
this so that you have read it. But I think it would be probably even more efficient for you to hear, unless you get somehow uncomfortable with.
No, I just want to make sure that, since we're voting on things, and if there's any information in here that pertains to my vote, I would really like to know it in depth, if there is in-depth information. Not even knowing what's in here kind of is,
I'm wondering, not to put you on the spot, that even a 10-minute read might not completely answer your question. Kylie, when we have something that's going to come up and there's a motion, could we be really clear to how that's dealt with in here? And at least you could highlight that for the committee, and then they also will have the chance to read it later also. I think that'd be the easiest way to make sure you're not flying blind.
I think
Right.
there's nothing in here about the library other than that a verbal update will be given.
well, as we go along, if you could do what Jim had suggested, I appreciate that.
Monique, why don't you come join us?
Now, Monique is our library director. She's also our interim community services director. So we're having this interesting interface between CSD and libraries.
I thought, what's her name was there? Kristen.
Kristen,
I am.
yep.
When did that
Kristen
happen?
served for a while, and then we made this move for now to get some greater insight, and Kristen continues to do just
So
an
it's your idea to
amazing.
cut the special events.
I was
Yeah,
just
she
learning
said
the
rather
budget.
than libraries, I'm only interim director in community services. I can go back to libraries, so yeah.
Yes, blame me. Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity actually to address you, even though I was technically on vacation. I was watching both hearings. By the time you got to the library, I was at a bar in St. Augustine, I'm afraid to say, but all of us watched the events. So it was a lot of fun.
Bunch of libraries, yeah.
No,
Three
not a
libraries
bunch.
walked into a bar.
Yeah, right. Something like that. So I did hear your questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer them. I'm going to actually answer a couple more than were included on that. First, I wanted to mention that the Library Advisory Commission routinely reviews a lot of the issues that you brought up. So they have had regular reports on either ebooks or, use of volunteers in the library or something like that. So all of those things do regularly come come before the LAC and we provide them with the basic information. One of your questions had to do with the use of volunteers in the library to help extend hours. First, let me say that I believe that we can't use volunteers to do regular staff work. We use them for enhanced services. We have annually, we use enough volunteer hours that it is between 1 and 2 FTE equivalents for special programs, for ESL tutoring, for things that have to do with assistance with 3D printers, things like that. So it's generally enhancements, not the regular direct service. The librarians in the library have, nationally, it's a sort of a general standard that librarians have master's degrees. So from an accredited university. So our librarians do have that, or we help them to get that. The frontline staff that you see who are experts in customer service and resolving issues and assisting with copiers and signing up for computers and finding materials, those are highly trained staff. Many of them do have advanced degrees. They're not technically librarians. So I wanted to be sure that you understood that we have a really, like many libraries in the country, a really well-educated staff able to help the community. 3D printers, that was one of the things that did come up, and there was some discussion about that. So the 3D printers that we have, we did get via grants. They are very delicate, sensitive pieces of equipment. The extruders often get stuck and jammed. Kids will put their hands inside it while it's going on. So it takes a lot of staff time to actually work with them. They're available per sign up, just as a computer would be or something else in the library, but they're something that does require more staff time than probably most people expect. We do have them. We love them. There's been some really creative projects with them. We'll continue to use them and make use of them. The one thing that the grants funded initially was the supplies. We've reached the end of those supplies after 2 years. So we are going to begin charging, as you saw in the muni fees, for the 3D printing by weight. However, those 3D, it didn't come with maintenance contracts or anything like that. So those are the things that we've had to absorb. And in fact, most of the library's contractual expenditures relate to maintenance of equipment, whether it's the automated materials handling, self-check machines, security gates, things like that. That is what that funds. Next, for the let's go on to the electronic resources. So, in this current fiscal year, in our budget, about $675,000 is allocated towards materials, in the broad sense.
Right.
35,000 is allocated to e-resources, not just ebooks, but everything that we have. So all of the magazine and journal databases, resources for kids on California missions to help. Nothing's better than 11 p.m. at night trying to get your fourth graders' mission report done, to have that online. Learning foreign languages, downloading music, streaming movies, all of those kinds of things fall under that 230,000. Of that, 33,000 is for ebooks. We do a lot through.
How much for ebooks?
33,000.
33,000.
We do a lot through consortial borrowing. And as a general rule, all of us, the public libraries, try to avoid buying the ebooks from the publishers who require that we repurchase it after 26 circulations. That was sort of their own arbitrary business model early on. Many of our vendors are moving to a system where the library isn't even necessarily responsible for selection. If you, as a library user, come in and you see something that you like that's available, you click on it, and at that point, we're charged. Generally, far less than buying it outright. So for you, it's $1.50, and you're not charged, the library is as part of our contractual arrangement. We examine the circulation and use of all of these things on an annual basis. We look at how many people have been using them. Do they really seem to make sense? We have 45 different databases, foreign language magazines, foreign language newspapers, tutoring, online tutoring and homework assistance and resume assistance from 1 to 10 p.m. that's available to all of our card holders. Genealogy research, anything that you can really think of, you can almost get assistance with. We really bulked those up when we were under construction because the library hours were less consistent than they are now, and we wanted people to be able to have access to the resources as much as possible when they were traveling from home. You know, I don't know about you, but I never think about needing a tour guide until I'm packing or on my way to the airport. It's really great to be able to download a travel guide onto my phone and have that when I get to my destination. So, looking at it in the grand scheme, $675,000 for materials, looking at, a third of that is spent on the e-resources, but that accounts for nearly 1 million material uses over the year. And so 1/3 of that goes towards that. The cost of a print book is less. It's, about, on average, about $15 an item. We are not charged the Amazon rates of $9.99 for ebooks. We're charged around, depending on the vendor, maybe $60, maybe less. We do purchase items that are requested by Palo Alto residents, whether it's print or electronic. We do have a strong base of users who do really prefer the e-versions, just as we have a lot of people who really want paper. I think the thing that we try to think of is, even though we've just built these libraries, they're now 3 years old or older. We do need space. We need to make those considerations, and when you're having physical items in the library, you need to constantly reassess. We do have online systems that help us do that, and the librarians, as the professionals, pay attention to what the community is using, what they need, what the school curriculum is like, what will help support that, so that everybody can have access to as much of our resources as possible. Okay, I have the hours of the library. That was another question. So everyone, I think, if asked, would say, of course, I want more hours at the library. The question I think we need to ask is, are they going to use it? Will they actually be there? I think if I were a teenager, I would definitely tell my parents the library was open till 10 p.m., no matter where I was.
To do that, actually.
You and everyone else, Jim. What I think is important is that we need to take a little time. We have older adults in the community who really want us to open as early as 8 in the morning. So there's a balance of, I think, what those needs are. And I'm often accused of being ageist because I'm focusing more on the teens and the kids as opposed to the needs of the older adults in the community. I like to think that we do, within our constraints, as good a job as possible at meeting everyone's needs. We do have staff who've been trained in sort of the Harwood Institute methodology, looking outward, talking to the community, facilitating discussions, and we've done that on various topics to help guide us as we go forward. So we can look at it. I think we came up with a basic cost of just under $3,000 an hour. I think what's really key,
Now, is that $3,000 an hour for every hour? I mean, how does that work? I mean, is that, so
Yeah.
if it's 5 times?
Yes.
So if I said to you, Mitchell Park Library closes at 9 right now.
Right.
So if I said, keep Mitchell Park Library open till 10, you think it's 3,000 times, and if it would be 5 days a week, it'd be 15,000. If it was, 7 days a week, it would be.
per hour, yeah.
Yes.
Right. So, so that's including staff at a minimum staffing level to be safe in the building. Any other sort of, utilities and overhead kind of costs, and there was another aspect of that. So, yes, so if it was just Mitchell Park, again, keeping in mind that we've been trying to streamline them as much as possible so people don't have to think, okay, it's Tuesday, is Rinconada open at 9, is it open at, whatever it is, so, but fully understanding that there's always, parameters to that, and as I frequently tell Jim, all it takes is money, so. He doesn't always like that answer, but.
So,
Paid my library fines, come on.
so when I'm at the library
Yes.
at 9 o'clock at night,
Yep.
it seems filled with teens who want to stay.
Mhm.
Is it your belief that the teens would stay till 10, or do you believe that it's?
Sure, I think so. I think I think it depends on the teen, and obviously the family and the parent, and we're certainly not going around to make sure they're doing homework, right? So if this, for many teens, can be a social outlet as well, and that's perfectly legitimate. It's the same for adults. You asked a good question about how long do people stay in the library, and that is not something that we track. You don't have to have a library card to use the library. So other than doing some observational study, we're not sure about that. But, we could, the study session, the expanded hours that we have for students during finals week have been very popular. They've also included food and, therapy dogs and things like that. Do I think people would stay? We can always give it a try and see. There's no,
Right. So what I'd heard from kids was that, there's often sports and other stuff. By the time they
Sure.
get to the library to do their studying, it would make a big difference to them if they had that extra hour before they basically had to go home. And leaving at 9, by the time you get home and then you got to start studying again, it doesn't really work if you're going to
Right.
get to bed at a reasonable hour.
right.
Now, reasonable hour for a lot of teens is midnight, but
Right.
I'm not sure we want to encourage
That's the other thing,
that issue.
right.
But I do think by staying open till 10, you do allow the teens that option to then go home and stop studying and go. And so that was really the question of how much it would cost. And, do you also see the need? Because, you have to be careful about anecdotal. As a council member, you primarily get anecdotal information
Yeah.
from the community.
Yeah.
And so, so what I'm hearing you say, and Mitchell Park is open, so this would be 5 days a week, right? I mean, if we did it. You probably wouldn't need to do it on a Friday. I mean, so it's really 4 days a week.
Right.
So-
Right now, we're open till 9, Monday through Thursday.
And are we seeing certain days in Mitchell Park where there are more, like on a Monday night, are the teens all there, or or is it really Wednesday, Thursday when they're trying to, wrap stuff up for the week and they've already had the weekend, so on Mondays they're not there as much, or is it jam-packed solid till 9 o'clock those 4 days?
I do think it depends on the time of year. I mean, and the day of the week. We did look at how many people, looked at how many people are there when we open, as well as how many people are there, when we close. It looks like at Mitchell Park, when closing at 9, we have, between the 8 and 9 o'clock hour, in the sample we did, 51 to 62 people. So, and at Rinconada, during that same time frame, we have 34 to 47 people. So about somewhere just north of half. You know, if you look at the opening hours, you generally have between 100 and 200 people who come in
At 9 o'clock in the morning.
at 10 o'clock in the morning. We're
10
open at
o'clock in the
10,
morning.
10 to 11. So, and on the weekends, over 200 at the 10 to 11 hour. So,
Now, if people asked for the earlier hours, you said, during the weekdays or on the weekends or all
during the
time?
weekdays, yeah. And again, I think if, you know, we would look at this, we do actually do a fair amount of data analysis. We have a committee. We use it for, we've done lean management, you know, looking at circulation, looking at how we process things. We could certainly have a group focus on this. And I would, you know, there are many libraries who are not open on Sundays during the summer times, for example, school year only. So this could also be a 9 to 10 o'clock during school year, so that it's not year-round as well.
Right, I mean, I didn't think it needed to be year-round.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Any other questions from committee members? From Monique?
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually on the Google Maps website right now, and I don't know if you know, but it shows you kind of like the popular times of the hour.
Yes.
In fact, it shows that right now in the Mitchell Park Library, there's not that many, it's not very busy right now. So have you guys looked at this kind of data?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Because to me, just looking at this, it seems like it would make sense to shift the hours back. So instead of opening so early, maybe opening later, right? And not just for the Mitchell Park Library, but I'm looking also at my own local library, College Terrace. I would say the same as well. So I guess what's the motivation? I mean, you mentioned that maybe some of the older folks want it earlier, but if you look at the graphs, so maybe you could comment on that.
Yes, so that's a good observation. Again, a lot of the, it may not be a high number of use. What are we at? I don't even know what time it is anymore.
11:30.
11:30, woo, right before lunch. But that morning time for many people, those are people who come in every day. You know, they're very dedicated. People come in and use newspapers, and yes, you could say, well, you could use the newspaper at noon, you could use it online.
Well, I think it's also, maybe what happens is, because it's busier in the evenings, right? Or when the kids are out of school, that maybe people want some quiet time, so that's why they do it.
Yes, that too.
But in terms of if we're trying to maximize the utility of these valuable resources and staff time, then wouldn't it make more sense? I mean, I understand maybe some people's desire to be in the library by themselves, which we're super quiet, right? I get that, but that's almost like the reverse of maximizing utility, right? You're basically having a library for just a handful of people versus if you're open later, then you're maximizing utility. So I guess I'm just trying to understand the logic of why we would try to maximize utility for a handful of people versus more people, like if you shift the hours back 1 hour.
It's a good point. We'd need to look at it a little bit more to see. I think what you're talking about, when you look at that opening hour, we have between, 100 and 200 people coming in at the opening hour, and then it drops off a little bit, but picks up again in the afternoon. So,
Yeah, I guess I just see the role of the library kind of changing over time. And, there's a big desire for community space. I, for one, would love to see libraries more aligned to when the kids are out of school, versus just trying to optimize for a handful of people who want quiet time because they don't want to be around when a bunch of teenagers are in the library.
right.
So,
Here, we got the chart right up.
This is exactly, really applies to a lot of libraries, but I hear what you're saying. I think also that a number of our programs happen in the morning, whether it's ESL, and certainly those could happen without the library being open. We would need to shift our spaces. The public meeting rooms are very popular, and the study rooms, we do have a number of people who are working on businesses, working with people around the globe because they have the
Sure.
the Skype. Story time for kids happens in the morning, and some of those story times have 100 people in them. So I hear what you're saying, and maybe it's not consistent. Maybe there are
Well,
mornings when it's available and not mornings.
To me, it just seems logical that you would want the libraries open when it's busiest, right? And you would want to shift hours to whenever it would maximize the utilization of those resources.
Right.
So anything less than that, I wouldn't understand why, but that's what I would say.
I think sometimes the library serves a larger purpose than just straight utility, because we are dealing with education, we're dealing with people who, some of them are unhoused, some of them don't have air conditioning, so they come and use us because we're cool. Some people come. Literally cool, yeah, right, literally. So I think, I hear what you're saying. The fact that we have 5 libraries for 64,000 people is also, I think, we're a unicorn. Most communities would have 1, maybe 2. So, let us do a little bit more analysis of that. We've looked at it. I think when we reopen the new buildings, people who are paying for those buildings really wanted them to be open. And I think that was a big impetus of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it seems like we should try to optimize the hours a bit to be when the libraries are most full.
Yeah.
And are being used the most versus trying to focus it on maybe a handful of people who come in regularly early in the morning, right? I think we'll get better community benefit out of that versus, so, I mean, even days, right? Because I know, like, for the College Terrace Library, right, it's always closed on Sundays. But, like, maybe we should move one of the weekdays to the weekend, because I can tell you that would be a lot more utilization on a weekend versus a weekday. So I'm trying to understand what is the logic of why do we have the hours, like, a weekday when most of the people are in school or working versus, like, a weekend when most people are around? Because it's a neighborhood library, right? It's maybe a little bit different, let's say, in downtown, where maybe there's a lot of people working, a lot of offices and stuff like that. Maybe it's different. But when you're in a neighborhood, right, especially in Palo Alto, both parents have to work typically, and the kids are typically in school as well. And so why would you have the hours when yeah.
So in our analysis of that, we've looked at a number of the local businesses, and there are a number of people quite a few people who actually use College Terrace, who are actually working from the offices in Stanford around there, but we'll continue with that.
Yes, go
Just
ahead.
curious whether you're in a position to quick move into the efficiency quadrant there and make a motion as to what you want to do? Not yet, okay.
Unlikely. Not
All
yet.
right. Well, that'll make the first quarter's this a nice taste for the $4 million review. Okay.
So I wanted to finish, so I would say that I think Councilmember Tanaka raises a good questions. I had wondered that as well, why we're not open on a Sunday and open during the week.
Okay.
You know,
At College Terrace.
At College Terrace. No, I'd wondered that. I mean, it had struck me that the weekends are probably, but I figured you did the analytics on it. So I do think we should look at maximizing utility to some extent. I mean, the community pays for all these libraries, and the more people that uses them, the better, obviously. And I think you agree with that.
I do.
Were there any other questions, or can we let Monique go? No. Doing a great job, by the way. Really appreciate the efforts you make on behalf of our libraries.
Thank you.
And I guess now CSD? All right. So we have 2 more things to do, right? We need to come back to the whole budget, and then we were going to have, the auditor was going to speak. So I think we're now moving on to, if people had some questions with the auditor, or if the auditor wanted to say something, right? So come on up. Oh, do we need a motion to approve the library? I think we do. Jim?
Yes, because you put it in the parking lot.
Yes, so I'll make the motion that we approve the library budget. All right, all in favor? And that passes unanimously. Got it, keeping me on track. Yes. Okay, great.
What happens to optimizing labor hours? Did that just happen, or?
You know, what happens to it? I guess we could have put it in the motion, but Monique heard you, you should, I mean, I don't know, you could put it in the motion, I guess, but
What's the question? Maybe let's put a motion.
Why don't we, what's the point?
his question was, what happens to Monique? What's the follow-up on Monique coming back and optimizing libraries? Monique's
Why don't we
basically
just fold
said-
this into this whole discussion we're gonna have in the first quarter? I mean, it would be appropriate.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I mean, it would be efficient and more effective within that context, too. Thanks.
Okay. All right, welcome, Harriet.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So I wanted to just talk a little bit more to the concept of outsourcing the auditor's office. I wasn't as prepared as I would have been if I had known that was coming as an option on last week, and wasn't aware that it was something that was going to be under consideration. So over the past several days, I've done a little more research on the issue, and I really wanted to kind of lay out some of what I've observed from where I've been able to get some information on outsourced audit functions. So as you know, I think most of you know, City of Stockton had some difficulties financially several years ago, and as part of that, they completely eliminated their audit function, and they began using a consultant to be their internal auditor. I don't know how you can have a consultant be your internal auditor, but that's what they call them. And so they don't have any audit reports listed on their website, and I was able to go into their audit committee meetings and do some look at their status updates, which they do fairly regularly. And after going through, several, quite a few of them, I was able to glean from the information in there that they're spending about $450,000 a year, but they're not really doing performance audit. What they're doing is mostly internal control reviews and helping departments develop policies and procedures. I know that Modesto, the city of Modesto, also outsourced their audit function several years ago after someone left, their city auditor left. They have a website presence, but there is no information on there to give you any indication of whether they're actually doing any audits, and I could not get any information about actual cost. So then I turned to someone I know who recently went to Valley Metro in Arizona. They established a new internal audit function about a year ago after they had some financial issues. And what she told me is that she has had some consultants come in doing work for her during this first year before she begins to staff up. She has had them assist her on 3 audits so far. She told me she has had to redo much of their work, and that their work would not pass government auditing standards peer review. So as you know, my office follows the government auditing standards. Following a recognized set of auditing standards brings credibility to the audit profession, and if you cannot cite the standards in your audit reports, then or pass a peer review that says that you have complied with those standards, it does definitely bring down the credibility of your work. So she said that the way they document their work, it's not real clear to tell what they've actually done. Their reports have been very poorly written, and she's had to spend a lot of time redoing that. She did tell me she would be available to talk to anyone if they want to talk to her, just not to a reporter. And so then I also want to highlight a little bit of the work that we're doing in our office right now. As you know, that the city is getting ready to, they have already issued an RFP and are in the process of finalizing their evaluation of the proposals received to implement a new ERP system. And our office is doing a fair amount of work in preparation for that to support a successful implementation of the ERP system. And the primary reason is in previous jurisdictions where I've worked, we have seen, there was one jurisdiction where I worked where they pulled the plug after $30 million had been spent because these ERP systems do often fail. in the implementation phase of them. It's the first part, setting the requirements, selecting a contractor, is usually successful. And then as you get into design and implementation, that's where you start to get the cost overruns. So we have a series of audits. The first one sort of sets the foundation for the remaining audits, and that's a data and system governance audit. And that audit is right now out for technical review. We will have a meeting on that next week, and that one should be coming to the Policy and Services Committee fairly soon as we finalize the, get through the technical review process and get then the city manager's response. But that's really kind of setting the foundation for what should be in place, what kind of policies and procedures you need in place to have a successful implementation process. We're also looking at some things that will help with the migration of data over to the new system. The first one is data standardization. The second one is segregation of duties. And the third one is data reliability. So in all three of those, we're finding some significant opportunities for improving what is currently in place before that data gets migrated over to the new system to ensure that we're not making garbage out become garbage in. On the data reliability, we actually did something similar in two previous audits where we identified some issues that with specific data sets that we've made specific recommendations for improvement. One of them was the water meters billing audit, where we identified several discrepancies in the way water meters are tracked in different modules of the current SAP system, and how that data needs to be cleaned up, because if you don't know where you're drawing it from, you could be migrating the incorrect data. We also identified quite a few issues with our vendor master file when we did the payments audit, and the ASD is committed to making some changes to that before migrating over. Just to mention a few other audits that are currently in place, we're very close to finishing up our code enforcement audit and an audit of the business registry, which came up as a topic earlier, and we've recently started a mobile device inventory and security audit. So what I'm really saying is that I think it's important for you to think about whether this is the right time to think about contracting out and what you will get for your money. Like I said, I haven't been able to get a lot of information from what's currently being done. Last week, I did mention that there aren't a lot of firms out there that do performance audit work, and I think the conversation I had this morning with Valley Metro confirms that there are some challenges in contracting out that may seem not exactly what you would expect on the surface, where it's easy to say contract it out, but then if you do, will you get the quality of work that you want for what you're paying for out in contract dollars? So that's what I have to present, and just wanted to make sure I was able to give a more informed, some more informed responses than I was able to last week.
Okay. Any questions for the auditor? Eric?
How can we get so your anecdotal evidence is, and thank you for doing that, is interesting, right? I think we need to think about that, all right, as a group. How hard will it be to get sort of more exhaustive assessment of the availability of whether, such services can reliably be contracted out in whole or in part? How can we get more information?
I could do more research. I had a limited amount of time. As I said last week, I didn't even know this was something that was going to be put out on the table. So I spent time this weekend doing some research and then trying to do a little more this week to see what I could find. And I was trying to find places where I know they've done some contracting out. I do know when I worked for the Washington State Auditor's Office, when they first started up that program, they were contracting out everything. When I went there, they brought me in to transition out of contracting because the cost was so high for contracting. They were spending an average of, I went back and looked at those costs, they were spending an average of about $1 million per contract, and they were getting very voluminous reports. And I do recall that those reports weren't well received by the agencies, but that's also a state agency, so it's not really as comparable to local government and the types of firms that we might be able to get to even bid on our audits.
Greg? Did you have your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
So tell me, do you know, so let me ask you, why is it important to have an auditor function?
So the auditor function, as I think you heard some speakers already say, it does provide accountability and transparency. It allows us to go in and look at operations and see areas where we might be able to streamline functions, identify issues that may not come to light within a department if the auditor isn't there to bring it out. I think one of the things that I have not been able to do that I think would be really helpful would be to do a citywide risk assessment to really see where are our biggest vulnerabilities for not being able to achieve our mission in an efficient and effective way, and really looking at, are we getting the outcomes that we want to be getting in a cost-effective way for the money we're spending?
And back in 1983, when the residents of this town decided that they needed an auditor, can you tell me what was behind that big push back then?
I am not aware of what was behind it back then. I could tell you.
Because it was included into a charter, there
Correct.
must have been an extreme need for that
I know
office.
we do have a copy of the ballot measure that was put forward, and I could get a copy of that and forward it to you.
Tell me a little bit about your staff. I mean, when you came, when was that?
I came in 2014.
How many of your staff was inherited?
4.
And you have a total of 5?
Yes.
And how can we have your staff be more productive? I mean,
Right.
let me, I just want to point out, I actually think that your office is very productive, having sat through 1 year of policy and services meetings, listening to all the audits that you guys came back with. And there's a lot that is in the works, especially with the ERP system that you guys are all trying to implement in multiple departments. I think it's citywide, right?
Yes.
Changing the whole program. So that's a big job in itself. And in addition to that, City of Palo Alto does have utilities as well, which is another big department. And so, in a sense, you guys are 5,
Correct.
including yourself, 6.
Correct.
That is all over the place.
Correct.
So yes, it's a big job. So I think you guys are
Yeah.
doing great. Maybe there is some need for more collaboration and definitely stepping it up with your staff members. I don't have the inside, I leave
Yeah.
that for you to.
Right. I do have a response for you on that. So I recently sent one of my staff, I think it really lies in project management. There's the audit side, but audits are projects, and really getting to a project management perspective and saying, how can you manage these projects in a more time-effective way? And so I recently sent to one of my staff to an agile project management training, and that person is tasked with developing a plan for how we can implement and apply it to our audits to make them progress in a more timely manner. And just doing that should help us be more productive.
I also find that, your office has given a level of confidence to the residents in town as to ensuring that, that there is a check and balance in place. And so on that note, I think that it's important that we have that accountability and transparency through your office, which is why I think having your staff member and supporting your office and you is important as council members. But also, it really concerns me what, Jim, you said about the Senate bill that's coming forward in terms of contracting.
No, that's
Is that
city-
different?
That's a California Supreme Court ruling decision. Molly could speak to that more specifically. And obviously, this is
But it's not the same as outsourcing.
Well, no, but, well, I think this, I'll let Molly speak to
yeah.
it, but it is one of the factors overall that we're going to have to be factoring into lots of our considerations about how we provide services as a city, and we're moving into a new area, a little unknown area.
So a minute to comment. So we do have a new decision from the California Supreme Court that speaks to a body of law that had long existed with respect to when is a person doing work properly classified as an outside consultant or contractor versus actually being an employee. So it's not solely the determination of the paying agency which status is the correct one. It depends on how the work is structured, the nature of the work, the way the work is done and managed. And so that's an issue that, with all of your consideration about contracting out, all of that will need to be run through that analysis. And that's one of the reasons why it really makes sense what the city manager has set up for you today, which is to set some dollars into a separate bucket not to be spent, but to allow sufficient time to work through the process of considering and implementing those decisions appropriately. And so I understand you're doing some preliminary discussion today, but the auditor has really only had a few days to think about what is really a complex set of questions, and we certainly have not done this analysis that you're referring to now, Councilmember Koo, and there are other considerations as well. So I guess I would encourage the committee in the efficiency sector to perhaps note this as a initial conversation, but understand you'll need to have further conversations, and staff, including the auditor, are not in a position to give you full analysis and complete answers on these issues today.
Do you want
So I actually view the auditor function as one of the most critical functions of the city. We're going to be spending $704 million of our constituents' money, and we want to make sure it's money well spent. So I actually think that your office is actually a critical function. I'm actually glad that we actually have this office, and I'm glad that the voters back then thought this was something we should do. And one of the reasons why I think this is really important is, and it's something which we were going through this budget process right now. I really think that benchmarking is very important, and I actually want the auditor's office to actually play a bigger part of it. Unfortunately, I don't see too much of that. Maybe you're not staff for it, or maybe that's not your charter per se, but that's something I would really like to see, is more benchmarking, right? Like how. I do push on the city manager for this, but in some ways, this benchmarking should be independent, right? This is something maybe perhaps your office should be doing, so that we understand how we're performing against other cities. How's that? Well, yeah. I mean, but anyway, so I think that's something which I would like to, because I don't, like for instance, like comparing what is our public safety costs versus other cities. I ask for this. Sometimes I get it. Oftentimes I don't. So I end up doing it myself, right? And if your office could actually provide that function, right, or that help, so we understand what is best practices, how efficient are we? Because a lot of times the big problem that I have is all we have is what we did historically. And historically, maybe we did great or maybe we did poorly, but we really don't know because we don't have any other way to compare. And so, and I don't know if you were here when I talked about like the idea of having open data or transaction level data available. But that's one of the reasons why, is because I really do want transparency. I really do want help in terms of interpreting this data, really making sure that we are having the right metrics and we're actually best in class in various areas. Now, the one thing that the chair talked about last time, which was why I supported this, was we have a dropping number of audits, right? I think it was, what was the numbers? You mentioned it last time.
Well, I was gonna, want me to just jump in and address what I was gonna address on the audits, on the thing, because it's, I mean, basically, I've been told by you that we should be able to produce 10 audits, but that but that you're gonna set a goal of 6, because it's in baby steps to get it up there.
Correct.
And that your staff is having a hard time even getting to the 6 number. And I view that as very unfortunate, and that audits are taking much longer than they should, and that we definitely have a productivity issue in the audits office. And I know you're trying to get it up to 6, but you have told me that best practice would be about 10, which is, so we're at about 50% of where we should be if we got to where you want to be, 60% if we want to be, and we're not producing nearly the number of audits we should. I have a lot more to say about that, but I do think we can take a step back on this. But I do think that, I believe my recommendation probably would still stand. I think it's a good plan to come forward and say to ourselves, okay, let's look at this in depth at finance. Let's give you the time to look out what this would look like. Let's give people time to talk to the employees, that kind of stuff. And let's come back with more information and make a decision. I don't want anyone to think this is a precipitous decision. And I also don't want people to think that we are outsourcing the auditor's office. No, you are the auditor. The question is, what tools are out there for you to solve this productivity issue in your office? And, you know, because what we're clearly doing right now is not working, in my opinion. And so I don't know how we solve that. You know, if you could basically get 6 audits a year at 80% of the cost, to me, that's a no-brainer. Now, if upon further reflection, that's not possible, I do think we need to then understand and come back to finance and see what that really looks like. So that was my concerns and how we get there. And I'm sort of with, I believe what your concern is what are the benchmarks and what should this look like? And you've told me it's 10 audits a year, but the best we're doing, well, we're hoping to get to 6 because we're not even meeting that. So that's my concerns about productivity. But I interrupt you.
So thank you for jumping in, because that's,
I hope we could also stick to the knitting on this issue, and I'm sorry, not to go a little further far range on stuff that is generally would be outside the purview of the auditor, or there is a conversation that we need to have organizationally. Be perfectly honest with you, with the responsibilities that I feel as city manager I'm charged with under the charter. And so, I mean, I think there's some very specific things that are related to your initial direction right now that we want to be talking about. And the larger question I would come back to is this first quarter next year discussion about how we're delivering services, what's the most effective way to do it, how can we save costs, and those sorts of things. I don't think if we can't learn some discipline and know how to postpone some discussions to the appropriate time and focus on what's necessary, we are never going to solve the problems that you want to solve. We are not modeling, in some ways, the behavior we're going to have to really solve the $4 million. So if you could stick to that, that would be great.
Well, on this particular issue, I think, Councilmember Tanaka's, he's sort of zeroing in on the right place. I mean, this is not an issue of whether we need an auditor's office or not, okay? Auditing function's an important function, we should have it. And the real question is, how should it be structured in order to best serve the interests of residents, right? And it actually looks fairly simple to me, which is number and quality of audits, what's the best way, which direction are we better served? And I think that's a legitimate question. We're not going to answer it today, obviously, but, you know, I think Councilmember Tanaka's comments about benchmarking sort of go to the heart of that, which is what should our expectations be and which way are we better served? And I think that makes sense to review.
No, I agree. I think benchmarking the production of audits and those sorts of things are accurate. I do not think it is most effective to be thinking about assigning to a performance auditor how we would set up our accountability mechanisms for routine management, how we do performance and all of those things.
But why
First,
not?
for a lot of reasons. It's not going to be nearly as efficient. There are some very particular standards and protocols that auditors have to follow in doing audits that is very different than what we have to do to be able to set up how we measure and perform things. I can guarantee you, we'll be able to provide what you want faster and more fully in the purview of the work that we're doing than the auditor. If you ask the auditor to do this, she's going to tell you she needs more resources. The issue that I have in responding to your request is we need more resources, and we need to have a discussion. I have not said no. I've said if, and that's a conversation we need to have. And I would put one other thing in, and I really want to make this speech because I think we misunderstand this. One of the biggest functions in accountability in government often is the separation of powers within government between the legislative and the executive branch, for example, or the judiciary, whatever, and who's watching who. We have a unified system of government here, not a separation of powers. So this isn't a question of Congress needing to have oversight over the executive. You all have oversight over the executive. The accountability mechanism, if you do not think that I'm doing what we need to do or the staff needs to do, you fire me or you hold me accountable. So we, first of all, have to have that conversation before we start saying, well, the city manager can't do this, so let's give this to somebody else. That is different than being sure we have an independent periodic review of performance stuff that, in a sense, it isn't designed to cover all areas. It is designed to inject this sort of independent oversight as an available thing to allow you to look at it. Not to look at everything, but to have that piece there. Ultimately, what you want to do is you all looking at everything through your staff. And that is a capacity conversation we have to have in a sophisticated way. And I'm sorry, I feel a little resentful that there would be a sense that we're not doing it because we just don't want to do it. And that's a conversation we have to have. And when we've not had that, when we've really, once we've had that discussion, if there's a different way we want to talk about it, I think we could do it. But I think we're drifting afield from how is the auditor's office most productive in accomplishing what is before her office right now, not even how do we do new stuff to it. Add new things to the plate.
I want to stay on track for that, but
I don't think you were on track, and that was my point.
Well, I can spend time addressing that. So this is the second year of the budget meetings. Last year, I asked for this information, and in fact, I had to do it myself. Right? Maybe it wasn't that accurate, but it was.
Are you asking for benchmarking data from the city manager or from the auditor?
Oh, what I'm saying is, I actually would like for either department at this point. Anyone.
We're only talking about the auditor at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a discussion
Yeah.
for the city
No,
manager.
but the city managers bring up a different topic. So, anyways, back to the auditor. Last time that the chair made this recommendation, and which was just last week, you expressed the opinion that there are a lot of different auditing firms you could find that could do this. You would be very picky and very judicious in terms of which ones you would pick, and you seemed like you supported this. So I guess what caused the change of heart?
No, I did not support it. I answered the questions I was asked at the time, and I was not indicating there are a lot of firms out there. I was indicating that there were actually not a lot of firms out there. And if you'll recall, I commented how this is a unique profession and that the people who are in the firms who can do this work are ones who generally had been in the profession in a government environment and then gone out into the private sector. That pool is pretty limited, and that's why you have to be picky about who you would choose when you're looking at that, because you want to look at what those backgrounds are and what type of audits they really do. And as I mentioned last week, you don't want to just go out and ask a CPA firm to come in here. This is not their bread and butter, and it's not the type of thing that keeps them that is their strong expertise. Some of them do it on the side, but that is not their strength.
Look, let me try, okay? I think we've raised a question of acceptable quality of audits and productivity. And we raised the question of, is there a different model that would, would deliver that, at a different rate, okay? And the short answer is, we don't know. The city auditor doesn't know. So I think what we've asked the city auditor to do is, let's find out, right? And that's a discussion for the first quarter.
So what I think we're going to do is roll that into them coming back and putting the city auditor coming back. But I do think that we should look closely at the productivity issues, the benchmarking issues that you raise, and be prepared to offer us options on how we would move forward and what it would look like. And I do want to say, first of all, I'd like to say, I appreciate a large percentage of the San Jose City Auditor's Office coming out to support us. Maybe you guys would like to audit our audit department. The three people here. And, I actually would encourage you and be happy to listen to what you guys have to say when we go through these hearings at the Finance Department. I think your experience is interesting. So I did want to say that we are not outsourcing the auditor's office. The auditor is in the charter. You are the auditor. And as I wanted to say again, we want to support the auditor's office to have high-quality audits, but enough audits that it is an efficient use of resources, and that moves forward. So that is the plan. There is no plan to make the auditor's office weaker. The plan is to make the auditor's office stronger. And what is the best way to accomplish that, given that, in my opinion, and that's one of the reasons we're going to hold this, is what we are currently doing is not working. So, unless anyone else has anything on the auditor's office,
Well,
staff.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So Councilmember Koo asked you how many members you inherited. You inherited 4, right?
Correct.
And you have 5 right now.
Correct.
And so 6 including yourself, right?
Yes.
And you've done performance evaluations for your department, right? And I think I remember that there's been some challenges. I don't know if you talk a little bit about that.
I don't think it's appropriate to talk about that in a public hearing. I would refer to the city attorney to advise
to
on
be
that.
honest with you, actually, the city council has direct responsibility for performance evaluation and management of 4 employees in the organization, and that is it.
No, I was not talking about your performance evaluation. I was talking about your employees.
Correct, and I think that's what Jim's
It's
clarifying.
really not your business.
I agree.
Yeah.
Our focus is quality and productivity.
So that's Harriet's, city managers, and what's our personnel function? Rumi, and Rumi's business. Anyway, the city manager did hand me a recommended motion.
Can we put that up on the screen also? Is that okay?
We could. We could. I think that's a good idea. I think that would make it much easier for everyone to see it.
If I might be able to remind one thing. I do want to remind that Harriet's office has been given that a big role in implementing the ERP. And so that was a large part of what they have been handling. I don't know for how long. I know a full year last year, I heard about it a lot on policy and services.
Correct, it's
I don't-
been mostly this year, correct.
So I just want to kind of remind that there has been a lot of work on that in various departments, changing over the system, making certain efficiencies, and then at the same time coming through with the national survey that we all depend on and the residents really appreciate. Then furthermore, the jobs of the CAOs, while we oversee their functions, I think that at the end of the day, Harriet's office actually provides us information as to our performance as council members and if our policy setting are the right, are going the right way with the community. So I find that very important when it comes back to us to let us know how we're performing as council members.
I think that's a great idea. I think we should performance audit the council members. I would be very supportive of that.
Actually, that has been one of my proposals also, since you love them so, the audit so much.
I believe we're prohibited from doing that.
We'll
It's specifically
contact the San Jose
outlined.
for us. Okay, so staff has put up the recommended motion. I actually have some changes that I would suggest to their recommended motion, which would be in number 4. Can you see it?
Okay, here.
Do you have more copies? Maybe you could pass out.
On this side, there's, let's see, one here.
So, why don't you take some,
Here, I have one more here. Well, you'll have to wait.
so, wait, you guys sharing, or who? You have one, right? You have one. So- Okay, so wait,
Kim can get one electronic.
so I have an extra one here now. So, Kim, do you want your own one, or, then I will give this to Kim. Okay,
Kim, are you gonna speak to this at all?
all right. So, I think the first 3 items are fine the way it's drafted. I think in item number 4, I think we should say, recommend the city council direct staff to, and then return to the finance committee during the calendar year 2018 with a work plan. I think that's really important to have a work plan. And I think the work plan should be returned to the finance committee really within the next 30 days, which would say what you're going to do, you know, how you're going to tee it up, and what time, when you expect to get to the finance committee. I think that would be very helpful.
Can we ask them how much time they need instead of?
Well, that's the question.
So I guess if, I'm trying to conceptualize a work plan as an evolving work plan from general to more specific. So
I'm
a
thinking of a
more general,
high-level-
high-level work plan
like we
within
have
30
on
days? Yeah.
on the calendar. We basically have a calendar which says, in July, you're coming to us with the, you know, the X thing that's happening at finance. I mean, what we really need to know is, how long is it gonna take you to do the staff work to be able to come to us with these different items? I assume you're not planning on having one meeting that says, here are 4 million in cuts. I assume that you're gonna have this over a series as you get the staff work done and do it. And I also assume that the municipal fee schedule is a separate item that you'll come forward with where we talk about that. That the strategy regarding prioritizing capital improvement project criteria in the gas fund is a separate item. So I,
Good, Greg,
Yeah.
let me just suggest, don't give us a timeline. I think it's clear enough with the work plan, the first touch point being in the first quarter of 2019.
well, I was gonna take
So-
that out. What does that mean, the first touch point being
Well,
the
okay,
quarter of
so,
2019?
I mean, that's not my word, just so it's in the first, with the first, in the, you know, early in the first quarter of FY 2019 or whatever. it
What are you gonna do in the first quarter of 2019?
Well, we're gonna come back to you with the work plan, right? In order to be able to begin to discuss. Now, we may be able to send you something.
Now, when you say the first quarter of fiscal year 2019, you're actually talking about
Starting in
in
July.
June, July, right? So you're
Well,
talking about the
starting
3
in
months.
July. So it's the
July,
first 3
August,
months,
September.
July, August, and
Right,
September.
which is
So-
totally
so-
fine.
Our view would be, you know, certainly when you come back from recess, we would be starting to meet with you all. We may be in a position to send the finance committee information before then. Do you know what I mean?
So I don't have a problem with that concept. I think that's fine. I do have a problem with the concept of you not thinking out and laying out how we are going to get this done by the end of the year and what meetings we're going to need, because you need to schedule those meetings in advance and you need to go through a process of how that's going to be.
Right.
And it's not okay to just say, we will get together and do this. I mean, I don't think 30 days for you all to get together and say, and it can change. I mean, I'm not saying it's locked in stone, but roughly, you're going to need 5 finance committee meetings we're gonna need 3 months to look at this aspect of staff work because it's involved. We're gonna need, you know, only 30 days to look at this aspect of staff work because Ed's totally on top of utilities and can come back immediately on the gas fund stuff. I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm giving you 30 days to it. If you wanted 45, I mean, fine. But the point is, you can put together a work plan of how we get together on this stuff. All right.
Why don't we just say by the break?
By the
Okay.
break is fine.
Okay.
That's fine. By the break. And then I think we should say, this will include a review of the city auditor's office staffing and the Office of Sustainability, rescinding the committee's initial directive. That's fine.
This may be out of order, but I'll suggest it anyway. I thought we were talking about doing the work plan in August as opposed to June, because you don't actually have council action until June. So.
Till June?
Until June, right, on the budget.
Right.
So the council will approve this action presumably in June. So we would then come back to the finance committee with the work plan.
Yeah, I
after-
don't see us,
in
we're gonna,
August.
well, I see us coming back. I mean, all I'm hearing I'm hearing more of a timeline work plan. We're thinking about a work plan about, oh my God, how do we figure out how we start working through this issue?
Yes, and I'm also thinking about the council approval prior to coming back to finance committee. And again, the timeline involved with that doesn't really allow us to come back to this committee in June.
I didn't realize we were coming back to the committee by us doing the work plan. Were you expecting that?
I was expecting you to come back to the committee with a work plan that we would approve, but a work plan of a timeline nature, frankly, saying, here are the number of meetings you're gonna need, here's what they can say. And I don't disagree that we can do it after the council approves this. That's fine. And that's why you said.
It sounds
by
like
the
an
break.
August product.
So we could do it by the time we come back from break. I think that's probably.
Okay,
that's
by the time we come
probably
back to break?
Gives you
Good,
enough time to
good, yeah.
get it
Oh,
done.
that's good. Okay.
I think if I can jump, I think what you're sort of saying is that we don't want to come back in August and start talking about how we schedule meetings for September and October or something like that.
Okay, by the time we come back with break, so I think the idea is we'll schedule a finance committee meeting anyway, the first week of your break anyway, let's just put it that way, and we will have put this together in advance of that, okay?
Yeah.
That's fine.
And I think what we got turned around on grammatically that we shouldn't get too hung up on is it said we were going to come back with a timeline by the end of the calendar year. And I think your point is a timeline to complete these discussions by the end of the calendar year. So the work plan isn't due by the end of the calendar year. The work is to be
Right.
done by the end of the calendar year.
That is correct. And that was my concern.
I had a question on this motion as well, which is, we had some discussion last week of reorganizing how sustainability is done and subsuming it into the city manager's office, which is, I think, Councilmember Koo, you were going to ask this too, right? Is that something we need more review on as part of the work plan, or is that something we can just proceed with?
Well, I mean, I think what I'm asking is, I basically proposed a budget that cuts the CSO position at mid-year, and we have funding for this. I mean, I think it's just a matter of clarifying the language that we're using here about the Office of Sustainability, unless I'm missing something. So, I mean, I was feeling that you can rescind that initial directive, and that, I'm trying to understand your question. I mean, I think that we're saying we're in agreement that the office is subsumed within the city manager's office.
So why don't we put that in the motion?
Okay.
Why don't we clarify that that's what you mean?
Could I just kind of understand the timeline? So it's not just finance, coming back to finance with the questions here, but how does it work when we go to council prior to the break? Is that the June 18th date that
Yeah.
you've set? And you're only having one meeting to bring this to council for the rest of the council to look at, this budget? Just one?
What's the 11th as well?
Huh?
We've got the 11th with the utility rates.
Rates, yeah. So we have the utility rates in that discussion, and then we have the recommendations from finance. And, actually, traditionally, that has been our schedule. There have been some times where we schedule 2 public hearings for the public, but the action portion has more often than not been been once. And I would say that out of all of the committees that we have had and the committee work, the council has most fully delegated real hard work on the budget to the finance committee. I mean, the general expectation is that you guys do the work and that, the council is able to sort of review it and assimilate it and deal with the questions and issues within one meeting. That has been the case.
It has been
Yes.
customarily. Okay, because I'm looking at it, we have new council members coming in. And if it wasn't because of Kylie and Lalo last time, I think I would be, what are they talking about, So, so as long as, the utility rates are kind of kept separate, and we do give enough time for the rest of the council to understand what they're dealing with, I think, and if this is what is done, then yeah, but the
Yeah.
2 dates, keeping it in line would be very important.
Yeah, I think we could take comfort in the fact that, in many ways, what the proposed budget, for the most part, that's before the council is, I'll just sort of call it a status quo budget, I think the bigger issue will be if and when we make these specific $4 million worth of changes, which will be during fiscal year 19, that will be the time when the discussion before the council will be what's especially important, because we would be really making some significant
Yes.
changes to how we do things. And what I think we can say based on experience, that most of the time, the only time there get to be real issues on the city budget is more often than not, well, twofold. The usual one is if we have a budget that is actually cutting a lot of programs or services, and then we have the public come out and say, why are you doing that? But we don't really have that at this stage. Or if we were really proposing a lot of revenue increases in some way that affected, we're not really doing that. But when we look at this $4 million impact later on in this year, we may have those kinds of issues, and at that point, we will clearly be able to have plenty of time for the council as a whole to deal with it.
So I hope that you're foreseeing some of the discussions that's going to come up based on even this amendment over here, this motion. So there's going to be quite, perhaps lengthy discussion about it.
Board of Council.
Yeah, council.
And I hope that time is provided for that open discussion.
Yeah, you guys have.
We'll have 45 minutes, Lydia. We'll be fine.
Well, when you look at all the issues you guys have a lot on your plate in June. We already have 5 meetings, and I think we're trying to get another special meeting. So, and that's to deal with the range of issues you have before you go on recess.
Council's always managed to get the budget done in one meeting, pretty much. I don't see why they would need more than one meeting to do it, but there's new heights of inefficiency we can always try and achieve.
Equal to the task, yeah.
We're equal to the task. Councilmember Philseth.
Yeah, so I think I understand what the city manager said about the Office of Sustainability. It's just that, come August, we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about, and I think this one is pretty much put to bed.
I don't think that needs to be, what you're really saying, excuse me. I don't think that actually needs to be specifically called out. What we want to do is have you rescind the initial directive. I don't think we need to review.
So what's different than the initial directive? I think what we could say is that the city manager can clarify the initial directive. How? The initial directive was simply to move it into the city manager's office?
Yeah, the only deal was, is you had sort of said eliminate the CSO position at the start of the fiscal year, and I'm asking you to leave it in as I originally recommended it, and we can, I would report to the council as to what we're doing.
Why don't we just say that you will report to, you want to leave it in for how long?
I want you to rescind the committee's initial directive, right? The budget right now includes half-year funding. I can just tell you right now that, I could probably shave 2 months off of that half-year funding, if you want to say.
So why don't we just make that the new directive? Just shave 2 months funding off of it. No?
Okay, all right.
Is that 2 months is to the end of the year?
And it's through October.
Through October. So originally originally it was to December.
Right.
So,
As of November 1st, we'll,
So why don't we just say that as of
Is that
November
okay?
1st? Funding through November 1st for that position, however you want to phrase it.
October 31.
well, I'm fine with leaving it the way that I'm in here, but if you guys want to, if you feel you want to.
You want to, we don't need the rescind language.
He's saying we do need the
Well,
rescind.
yeah, because
For
you,
the
you,
auditor's
Conflict with
office,
number 2.
yeah.
well, I'm assuming that that's what we want to do, because you had a specific
All right.
recommendation. huh?
Okay, that's
Huh?
fine. So why don't you
Yes or
get
no?
rid of the, why don't you put the rescind in, then just put through the office sustainably funded through October 31st?
Sure. And so just as a reminder to the full committee, what we've done over the course of the last 3 days is make tentative motions. And so what we're trying to capture here is everything, right? So what we've done is we've gone back and looked at all of the tentative motions, tried to capture all those tentative motions, including referrals, et cetera. And this is a summary of essentially all that we've done over the last 2.5 days, right? So what I think we can do is probably clarify the language in number 2 a little bit, that the Finance Committee recommends that to the full council that the Office of Sustainability be subsumed within the city manager's office with the elimination of the.
Well, why don't you say effective November 1st, 2018?
That's
and we
fine.
That's
just
fine.
say-
Why don't you say that?
We just say rescinding the committee's initial directive down there, that clarifies it.
Yep.
We
Why don't we,
just,
that's perfect.
Perfect. And then, so comma, rescinding the committee's initial directive. Right, and so what we'll do is we'll take out the redundancy under
Yeah,
5 and the first bullet, and leave that as just the city auditor's office.
right, there you go.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah, that keeps a review of the auditor's office there in that first quarter. That's good.
Yep.
Right.
Anyone else have any?
Yeah, I still don't know why we're reviewing the auditor's office. I'm okay with the sustainability bit.
I think you have, I'm guessing you have a majority of the committee that wants to recommend that the review continue into this, into the first quarter part of the fiscal year.
I guess I look at it as a cloud over her office. I mean, what is she gonna tell her staff members who are operating under a cloud, unsure of where they're gonna be going? And so, I mean, in some sense, we need to have confidence in her so that she can bring the confidence to her staff so that they can continue their job. I'm sorry about that, but I have to, yeah. And I just want to make sure that they're gonna do their job, giving it their fullest without a cloud hanging over their head.
How do you know that? Nice statement. How do you know it?
I don't. I'm looking for Harriet to do it. I am putting my faith and my, having her being an auditor, I'm directing her to go back and tell her people that they
So
need to do their
we can
job.
do- we
So
can-
I don't know it, but, this directive, if it comes back, when is it coming back? Sometime this year? Then.
First quarter.
Yeah. So all,
Right after the break.
so between now and then, her office, I mean, how do they operate? How does she give the confidence to her people? If we don't give her something substantial or something solid to take back,
I think there's a lot to take back. She can say the council has concerns about productivity, and we're gonna be reviewing the productivity and the way the audit office functions.
That's my read.
That's the,
And I think we have a responsibility to residents.
absolutely. I think we need to put residents first.
you want to use that one against me, but that's fine, you can use that. But the thing is, at the same time, we have an obligation to our employee too.
So, if you want,
I
we
mean,
can pull that
I
issue
hold-
out
I mean,
and vote
why-
separately on that issue.
Yes, yes,
Why don't
I
we do
can
that?
do
We'll
that.
split the motion,
I was going to suggest
and we'll
that.
just basically, we'll vote separately on the auditor language. Okay? Any other comments? Okay.
So, what's missing here also, I don't see anything on here about optimizing library hours. I think there's a consensus. I don't think anyone here doesn't want to optimize that.
Add that, come back to, talk about optimizing, come back to council and come back to the finance committee with a discussion of optimizing library hours.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? I think the city manager had articulated that that would be part of the first bullet under 5, when we look at the $4 million
Okay, well, I don't
in
have a 5
structural
on mine.
reductions.
Wait, so how is that?
So.
He's saying the first bullet, return to the finance committee.
Right, and so if we're gonna, because optimizing library hours is gonna be a component of that.
Why don't you just put including a discussion of library hours under bullet number 5, under A, the first bullet.
Under the first one, understood.
That way we just address Councilmember Tanaka's concern.
Sure.
Okay. Second thing is that the language here in terms of, where is it? Oh, yeah. It says also include discussion regarding the implication of accounting for rising costs in non-general funds, specifically enterprise and other funds. It's not quite as crisp. I mean, I know it's kind of getting to the spirit, but it's not really talking about the $2.5 million, or I guess $2.25 million gap that we're going to try to close. So it doesn't have to say structural reductions, but we should address that we're going to try to close that gap structurally. That's not necessarily 3 reductions, but it doesn't, it's kind of a soft close, right?
Sure, so we could say also include discussion regarding,
Closing the pension gap.
the implication of, closing the pension gap.
So at least half of the pension gap, right, which is 2.25.
Yeah.
At a
Right.
minimum of.
Yeah, the
2.5
commensurate
million.
50%, blah, blah, whatever.
Yeah.
Yep, at a commensurate 50% level as the general fund.
Okay.
Structurally.
And then the other thing is, I didn't realize Councilmember Cruz was going to change her vote on the CIP. I don't know if you feel strongly about that, but if you do, and I voted against it, so that means it shouldn't pass, right? Because if we have 2 people against.
Did you vote against, you actually
you had
abstained, but
abstained from it.
No, I did. I voted no.
it doesn't much matter. You can change your abstention to a vote against it if she's going to rescind hers also, so.
Yeah, so what happens to the CIP then?
Just goes to the council with a 2-2 vote.
Okay. Okay, so that probably needs to be pulled out then, right?
No.
So what we can do is, I was gonna say what we can do is add another usually what we did last year, because we brought the city manager's office with, or something, with a 2-2 vote last year, where we just say, on this specific item, so we can call it the general fund CIP, the finance committee's motion was 2-2 support, it was tie basically, for city council review. And that's all that happens. Ultimately, the vote between, from a finance committee's, ultimately, the finance committee standpoint, when we talk about majority or, unanimous approval of something, is dictating whether or not an item goes on to consent or an action item. But since this is the budget and it's such a large item, the whole thing is gonna go as an action item to the full council. So we'll just transmit that it was a 2-2 vote for that specific item. Okay?
Well, so there'll be a no with the exception of it, because they're not.
Correct.
The finance committee's not actually recommending approval of the capital budget, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, it's just saying I've got it.
Okay, and then last thing is I voted against a bunch of other things too, like the fee schedule. I forgot what it was called.
We'll summarize all the actions you took
Yeah.
in the wrap-up memo
Yeah.
that we give to the council.
Yeah,
So-
because
so-
in general, I support all this, except for all the ones I voted against.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, it'll have a 3-1 vote or whatever it is on all of those.
It'll set it forth all your votes.
Yeah, and the minutes.
In the minutes.
So, I mean, because in general, I do support this, except for all the ones I voted against.
Right.
So since we're sort of wrapping up we're sort of converging on a motion here.
That
right?
would be good, because we do have some pizza that's been delivered, and it's nothing
I hear
like
you,
cold pizza.
But it's thin crust pizza, right?
Well, it's kind of medium. It's pizza my heart. I think we struck the balance between the.
So nobody's going to be happy,
No
right?
one's happy, no one likes the pizza.
So can I
But-
just see the
but-
point of the rescission mine on the board before we vote? Sorry, Vice Mayor.
I think I have the floor.
That's okay. You're talking about pizza, so sorry.
So go on.
So,
Phil Seth.
So, there's something that's bugging me about the capital equipment budget, or the capital investment budget, and it is the $1.7 million for the council chamber upgrades. which is we at council moved to send it to Finance Committee for review, and we're going to do that, and I understand it, and it makes sense, and that's what we should do. And yet, we haven't done it yet, and so it's still in the budget, in the capital budget at $1.7 million.
Is it in the CIP or is it
1.7 or 2?
It's in the CIP. It's in the technology fund. It's in the technology fund, okay? It went to PTC last night, right? So, I mean, it's kind of a procedural thing because we're going to review it, and everybody understands it, and we don't know how it's going to be, whether it's going to be 1.7 or 0 or somewhere in between and so forth. But because we haven't reviewed it yet, and because the date seems to be moving around, we find ourselves in a position where we may conceivably ask the council to review the budget without understanding what that number is going to be. And I think everybody accepts sort of the complexity of that and so forth. But I'm just having a tough time sending a budget to council with $1.7 million for the council chamber upgrade in it, right? I think we ought to set it to 0, okay? And after we review what we're going to do for the council chamber upgrades, then go back and fix it later, right? Because it's very likely there are some things that we're going to need to do. I mean, I don't know if we're out of ADA compliance or not, but if we find out that we are, then we got to fix that. That's a big deal. At the same time, I personally don't think we need a giant 4G screen this year inside the council chambers to replace what's there. So somewhere in the
5G.
yeah, some people want 5Gs, yeah. Right, 4K, sorry, not 4G, right? I'm in the wrong meeting here, 4K.
We'll utilize 5G.
4K with the curved screen and like, you know.
So Eric, I fully support you on that if you want to chop it out.
I think we ought to just cut it to 0 in this budget and
If
fix
there's
it
a
later.
second, could I just suggest
I'll
a
second it.
motion that would say, the Finance Committee, however, I don't know how the vote goes, but, you know, essentially requested that we not include funding for the council upgrades in the proposed budget, with the understanding that council did refer discussion of the project to the Finance Committee, which is still expected to take place, you know, after the break.
Yes.
Okay?
I would support that motion too.
Do we have a vote on it, Greg, so we know?
They haven't voted yet.
We haven't voted on any of this yet. So,
No, we haven't done that either.
so we haven't gotten there yet. So what we're trying to do is get the motion in the right form. So Jim, do you want to repeat that, or is Callie getting it for you?
Kylie's drafting your motion on the screen.
I know, right?
You know, to remove funding for the, you know, council chambers capital improvement project from the proposed budget.
Pending review by the Finance Committee or something like that.
Understanding, you know, understanding that council had referred review of the project to the Finance Committee, I mean, which will occur after the break.
Why are we doing that after the break? Why don't we come in June?
Could be
I mean,
It could
I mean,
be,
we
okay.
should do this
All
in
right.
June.
Okay, in June.
It's tentatively in June, but I think
Yeah,
it's
so I think right now,
discussion.
most likely, your meeting will be February 19th,
June 19th.
June 19th, I mean? Yeah,
Well,
excuse me.
Unless that date is eclipsed with a study session on another topic.
Yeah, but that, I mean, we're targeting, yeah, that was one, no, actually, we're
I
looking
think
right,
it's June
no.
5th we have a council.
We're
meeting
looking
scheduled.
June 5th or June 12th or June 16th as the study session date. So the 19th was still available. It was. Right?
19th was still available.
Yeah.
Oh, but that would be the day after council adopts the budget.
That's right.
So it would still be after budget adoption.
Right, well, assume, yeah. Well, I think that's okay.
All right. All right.
So the only last thing is like what I just said, which is that I voted no on a bunch of things, so I mean, I'll have to vote no on this unless it says, there's a carve out for, how do we handle that?
We added language to the beginning that says it'll note the individual committee member votes on each item considered.
There it is.
And then it'll include the following amendments that we just discussed.
Yeah, but I voted against other stuff too.
No, but it'll be noted, all your votes will be noted. On each item, it'll be noted for the council. That's what that means.
Okay.
What about Lily's issue of CIP?
No, that's there.
It's there. It's I am actually looking for my issue on the auditor's office.
So what we'll do is we'll take a separate vote on that.
Yep, I pulled that out of the motion, we'll do that separately.
Okay.
So, can we look at the language again, that's a carve out?
Can you scroll back up?
Yeah. Ooh, sorry.
I didn't know you were doing it over there. Thank you, Kylie.
No worries. The new appreciation for David Carnahan right now. Not gonna lie.
But Kylie, this doesn't include the votes that I made on this.
We're not putting this in the motion, but the full report that goes to the council will have that.
Because it'll have the record from the
there'll be a
minutes
memo.
of the previous meetings, which we don't have all of that data on this computer, but it's in the clerk's minutes. So that would get stapled to this essentially.
Yeah, okay, well, I understand it's a recommendation, so in some ways it's probably okay, but the only thing is, if we do that, then why do we have number 3?
So the only vote that the committee took that was 2-2 was the CIP one. So that's the one that we're calling out was a split vote. Everything else was approved tentatively by the finance committee, either through a 3-1, a 3-0 with someone abstaining, a 3-0 with someone absent, or some other passing vote.
Okay, I'll let this go, but it's fine.
Well,
All
yeah,
right, is everyone,
they're all
is
noted.
everyone comfortable with that motion the way it is now?
Yeah, the only thing I would just say under 4, why don't we just make it a little clearer and just say which,
Well, we have to vote on that.
well, yeah, I'm just saying, rather than review
Right.
the project, which will be reviewed tentatively, why don't we just say, tentatively scheduled for June 19th, 2018, so we're more specific. That's the date we have. This is the English,
It's fine.
this is the writer. I know, it's not, I'm looking critical of you. It's just brought to you by your Department of Redundancy Department.
I know, a little.
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Let's do that.
I resemble that remark, and also I resemble it.
The only kind of reservation I have is like, if the budget stays as it is, I would probably vote against the budget. I mean, probably a lot of you guys know that already, but that's the main issue I have with kind of the motion. It's kind of, it's a recommendation, so it's fine.
Okay?
Also, just a clarification from a procedural standpoint, a reminder, so sorry, you guys. The Finance Committee is making a recommendation to the City Council, right? So ultimately, we aren't approving an ordinance, we're just approving what we're gonna bring in summary. Okay.
That's why I'm gonna let it go.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
in favor of this motion on the board, say aye. And that passes. Then we need to fill in the blank. The Finance Committee voted, am I correct in saying 4-0 to remove funding for the council chambers? Anyone?
Correct.
Okay, everyone's good with that? Or are you voting, you're voting yes, right?
For removing it,
Yes,
right?
removing the funding.
So that we can discuss. Correct. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
All right. Okay, so that passes 4-0. And then to have the discussion about the auditor's office, let's have a motion on that. I mean, not a motion, let's have a vote, but let's look at this. Will include a review of the request by defense regarding the city's auditor's office, including the committee's initial directive. Okay, all in favor of that? And that passes 3-1.
You're opposed, right?
You're opposed, I put you down.
I want to review, I want to discuss
Okay.
today.
All right, I think that wraps everything up.
We're done?
I think we're done.
Is it pizza time?
It's pizza time.
Okay, just before
Thank you
we do
very
that,
much.
Thank you.
I just really want to thank our staff, I mean, the OMB staff, finance in particular, but all the department directors, everybody who supported, adapted to and thank the committee for your work, and, I know there's more follow-up work to do, but you have advanced as a recommendation, not just the budget to the council, but dealing with a very critical issue facing our city, right? You have moved this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
All right. Pizza time. And thank you.